Hello everyone, and welcome back to Aged Tales. Tonight I have 9 chilling stories for you. Fictional tales crafted to help you drift off while the rain falls softly in the background. Each one is an unhurried little doorway, a quiet town with a locked room no one mentions, a night job that asks for one favor too many, a familiar building that feels wrong when the lights go out. Nothing here is real, and that's the comfort of it. Just made-up shadows, careful suspense, and gentle dread, told in a calm voice, meant to carry you slowly toward sleep. So get comfortable, let your eyes grow heavy, and let's begin. Story 1. When Lena Harper took the overnight security job at Brook Hollow Apartments, she told herself it would be temporary. That was the story she gave her sister, and the story she gave the leasing manager who hired her, and the story she repeated to herself whenever the wind snapped the bare branches outside her bedroom window and made her think of hands scraping along glass. Temporary meant the kind of job you worked for a season. It meant enough money to catch up on bills. Enough to keep the heat on without checking the thermostat like it was a luxury item. Enough to buy groceries without calculating every aisle. Brook Hollow was an old complex in the Midwest, built in the 70s when garden style meant fresh brick and honest optimism. Now it meant cracked sidewalks and little patches of grass that looked tired all year. It meant stairwells that smelled faintly of wet concrete. It meant fluorescent lights that buzzed with a steady irritation, like they resented being awake. Lena's post was simple. She sat behind the front desk in the lobby of Building C from 10 at night until 6 in the morning. She watched cameras. She logged noise complaints. She walked a patrol every hour, checking doors and windows, making sure the place didn't burn down or turn into a headline. The lobby itself was a box of beige carpet and outdated furniture, a small aquarium that no longer held fish, and a rack of paper flyers that curled at the edges. There was a keyboard behind the desk with labeled hooks and a worn clipboard for sign-outs. There was a coffee maker that tasted like it had never been cleaned properly. There was a little radio that only seemed to pick up talk stations at that hour. On her first night, the leasing manager, a brisk woman named Marcia, who wore her hair in a tight twist and spoke as if every sentence were a task, handed Lena a binder. "Everything you need is in here," Marcia said, "and I'll be honest, it's quiet. Most nights you'll be bored." Lena liked the word quiet. She wanted it. She wanted her life to feel simple for a while. Marcia flipped the binder open and pointed to a page in the middle. "This is important," she said, tapping once with a long fingernail. "If the phone rings after 2:30, you do not answer it." Lena blinked. "I'm sorry?" Marcia's mouth tightened the way it did when she didn't appreciate questions. "It's an old line," she said. "Maintenance. It's a leftover number, and it rings sometimes. We can't get it disconnected. If it rings after 2:30, you let it ring." Lena waited for the punchline, for the wink that would tell her it was just a joke to haze the new overnight hire. Marcia didn't wink. "And if someone comes to the desk asking you to open the laundry room in Building A, you tell them it's closed," Marcia continued. "No matter what they say, no matter who they claim to be." That seems specific. Marcia shut the binder with a soft clap. Temporary jobs are easier when you follow instructions. Then she gave Lena the key ring, heavy, cold, and left. Lena sat alone with the cameras and the lobby light and the faint hum of vending machines down the hall. She listened to the building breathe, pipes ticking, elevators whispering, the distant sound of someone's television through a wall. It was, for the first few hours, exactly what she'd expected. Quiet. At midnight, she made her first patrol, walking the hallway with a flashlight that she didn't really need. The doors along the corridor were closed, each one with a little welcome mat and a seasonal wreath that had been left up too long. The carpet was worn thin in the middle, a path of foot traffic pressed into the fibers. She moved slowly because there was no reason to rush. She checked the stairwell doors, the exterior exits, the utility closet that always seemed to have an odd draft. When she returned to the lobby, she wrote the time in the logbook. 12:17 a.m. Everything normal. The next patrol was at 1, then 2. Each time the halls were quiet. Each time the air felt slightly colder in the corners, as if the building held pockets of winter no thermostat could reach. At 2:28, Lena poured herself coffee that was more habit than desire. She sat down, pulled her jacket tighter, and stared at the bank of monitors. The cameras were labeled in black marker. Pool gate, parking lot east, stairwell C2, mailroom. On the screen for laundry A, she saw nothing but a white door and a small rectangle of hallway. Laundry A was not on her route. It was a separate building across the complex, a long walk through the courtyards. The leasing office kept it locked after midnight because of vandalism and because residents had complained about people leaving wet clothes in machines for hours. Lena watched the screen without thinking much about it. At 2:31, the lobby phone rang. The sound was sharp in the quiet, a clean, old-fashioned ring that felt out of place in a world of cell phones and soft notifications. Lena looked at it instinctively, her hand already half lifted. Then she remembered Marcia's fingernail tapping the binder. Do not answer it. It rang again and again. The cord coiled like a sleeping snake, pale and slightly grimy. The handset sat on its cradle, waiting. Lena's first impulse was annoyance. If it was maintenance, it could be important. Maybe the boilers were failing. Maybe a pipe had burst. She imagined waking residents, water spilling down stairwells, the whole complex turning into a mess that would somehow become her fault. The phone rang a fourth time. She let it ring. On the fifth ring, it stopped. The silence that followed felt thicker than before, like the building had leaned in. Lena exhaled, slightly embarrassed at the tightness in her chest. It was a phone. It was a rule. It was fine. She turned back to the monitors. Laundry A. The door on the screen was open. It hadn't been open a moment ago. The camera view was steady. No flicker, no glitch. 1 second it was a closed white door. The next second it was open, revealing a sliver of darkness inside. Lena sat up straighter. Sometimes doors didn't latch. Sometimes residents propped them open. Sometimes wind did strange things in old buildings. But the laundry room was locked. Marcia had said so, and she'd also said not to open it. Not for anyone. Lena leaned forward, squinting. The camera angle didn't show much of the interior, just the edge of a corridor and the black mouth of the room. Then, very slowly, the door began to close. Not swinging with a breeze, not snapping shut, closing with steady, measured movement, as if a hand were guiding it by the knob. It reached the frame and stopped. It didn't latch fully. It rested there, slightly ajar. Lena stared at it for a long time. At 3, she made her patrol early, not because anything required it, but because she couldn't sit there with the image of that door in her mind. She walked the hallways with her flashlight off, listening. Everything was still. Doors closed, no footsteps, no voices. The lobby was warm, the kind of warm you barely noticed until you left it. When she returned, she checked Laundry A again. The door was closed now. She told herself she was overtired. She told herself the camera must have refreshed weirdly. She told herself she would not think about it again. The second night was quiet again until 2:30. At 2:29, she watched the monitors with a careful attention she hadn't had before. She tried to keep her gaze on Laundry A without making it obvious to herself, as if looking too directly might invite something. At 2:31, the phone rang. She didn't move. She felt her shoulders tense anyway, as if the sound had fingers. It rang 6 times. Then it stopped. And on the Laundry A feed, the door opened again. This time, Lena saw something more. Not a person, not a shadow, just a shape on the floor, low and pale, as if something had been pushed out into the hallway and left there. At first, she thought it was a bundle of laundry, a towel, a sheet, someone's bag. Then it shifted, just a little. A slow, dragging movement like fabric being pulled inch by inch. Lena's mouth went dry. The shape moved toward the doorway, not out of the room, but toward the interior, as if it were being retracted, like whatever had been placed there was being pulled back inside. The door began to close again. Lena watched it shut with the same patient, deliberate motion as before. When it was closed, the hallway was empty. Nothing remained on the floor. She sat frozen for what felt like an hour. The rest of the night passed without incident. No alarms, no footsteps, no resident complaints. The sun rose. The lobby filled with early commuters in hoodies and people walking dogs. Lena left at 6, drove home with her fingers cramped on the steering wheel, and told herself she would quit. Except she didn't. She came back the next night, and the night after that. Because temporary jobs only stay temporary if you can afford to leave them. Because fear was familiar, and money was necessary. Because she told herself she could handle a little strange behavior from an old building. On the 4th night, she brought a notebook of her own and wrote down times. The way she used to do in school when she wanted to make sense of something. 2:31 phone rings. Laundry. A door opens. Door closes. No one visible. She did this as if documentation could protect her, as if writing it down would keep it within the realm of normal problems, a schedule, a pattern, something you could solve. At 2:31, the phone rang as expected, and this time she heard something else. Not through the monitors, not through the walls, through the handset, even though it was still on the cradle. A faint sound like breathing. Lena's skin prickled. The phone rang again. On the second ring, the breathing sound became clearer, as if whoever was on the other end had leaned closer. On the third ring, she heard a voice. It didn't speak loudly. It didn't use the kind of tone people used when they called to complain about neighbors or ask for spare keys. It was soft, close, as if it were right beside her ear. "Laundry's full," it said. Lena's eyes snapped to the monitor. Laundry A's door was closed. The hallway was empty. The phone rang again. The voice returned on the same breath as if it had never stopped, speaking. "Laundry's full," it repeated. "We need you to open it." Lena couldn't move. Her hand hovered above the desk, trembling, not reaching for the phone, just wanting somewhere to land. The phone rang a 5th time. Her stomach twisted with the sudden, absurd thought that she might answer. that she might say hello in her calm customer service voice. But Marcia's rule pressed into her mind like a hand on the back of her neck. Do not answer it. The ringing stopped. The voice didn't. It continued faintly through the dead line, through the plastic shell of the phone itself, as if it had found a way to exist without being invited. "We need you to open it," it whispered. And then, on the Laundry A camera, the door opened so wide the interior was visible. The room beyond was not dark. It was lit with a pale, humming fluorescence that did not match the complex's lighting. It looked too bright and too flat, like a hospital hallway. And lined along the floor inside, the laundry room, arranged in 2 neat rows, were shoes, dozens of them. Men's boots, women's flats, children's sneakers, slippers, all pointing inward, as if their owners had stepped out of them and walked barefoot into the bright light beyond. Lena's breath caught. She leaned closer without realizing she was doing it, her eyes searching for movement, for a person, for a reason. At the far end of the room, beyond the machines, beyond the rows of shoes, there was another door. A door she'd never seen on any floor plan. It was the color of old bone, with a metal handle and no window. And on the wall beside it, someone had taped a paper sign. The camera resolution was just good enough that Lena could read the words. "Return items here." Below it, in smaller letters, as if added later, "Do not wake them." The fluorescent hum came through the monitor speakers, a low vibration that made her teeth ache. Then the phone rang again. Once, twice. On the 3rd ring, Lena's hand moved, before her mind could stop it. Not toward the phone, toward the keyboard behind the desk. Her fingers brushed the labeled hooks, found the one marked Laundry A, and lifted it free. The keys were cold. They felt heavier than they should. Lena stared at her own hand as if it belonged to someone else. She set the keys down. No, she thought, no. The phone rang again. The voice returned, now no longer a whisper, but still intimate, still calm. "Open it," it said. "You work nights, you understand. Everybody needs some place to put what they can't keep." Lena looked at the shoes on the screen. They were clean, not covered in mud, not abandoned in panic, placed with care, as if someone had asked them to remove their shoes politely before entering. The door at the far end of the laundry room opened, just a crack, a thin line of darkness. Then, slowly, something moved in that gap. Not a face, not a hand, a shape like a sleeve, pale and loose, drifting outward as if in slow water. The motion was wrong, too smooth, too patient. The sleeve hung there for a moment, then withdrew. The door closed again. The phone stopped ringing. The laundry room door remained open. Lena sat in the quiet lobby with the rain starting outside, tapping softly against the windows. She felt the air pressure shift, as if the building had exhaled. In the binder Marcia had given her, there was a section called Incidents. It was full of bland language about broken glass, stolen packages, noise complaints. One mention of a resident who tried to grill on a balcony and nearly burned down Building B. Nothing about shoes. Nothing about doors that weren't on maps. Lena grabbed the binder anyway and flipped through it with hands that weren't quite steady. The laundry room page was there. Hours of operation, key access, cleaning schedule. And on the very bottom, in a line of text that looked like it had been typed and then photocopied so many times it was almost a ghost, there was a note. If the docker opens after 2:30, ignore it. If you see shoes, do not count them. If the phone rings, do not answer. You are not paid enough to be remembered. Lena stared at that line until the letters blurred. She thought about quitting again. She thought about walking out, leaving the key ring and the binder and the cameras behind. But she also thought about her bank account, about the overdue notice on her kitchen table, about the way her sister's voice had sounded when she asked for help with rent last month. So she stayed. The next week, the pattern continued. The phone rang after 2:30 almost every night. Sometimes it rang only once. Sometimes it rang so long Lena had to cover her ears. Laundry A's door opened on the camera. Shoes appeared. The pale light hummed. Once, Lena saw a laundry basket sitting in the hallway outside the door. A cheap plastic one, cracked at the handle. It tipped slightly, as if nudged from inside. A single sock slid out and landed on the floor. It was white, clean, folded neatly, like an offering. The longer it went on, the more Lena began to feel that this wasn't random. It was an invitation. And what made it unbearable was that the invitation wasn't threatening. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't scream or slam doors or try to claw its way into the lobby. It waited. It rang politely. It opened a door and held it for her. It asked, in a voice like someone you'd known a long time, for a small favor. Open it. On a Friday in late autumn, the rain came down in sheets, and the whole complex smelled of wet leaves and asphalt. Lena had been on shift for 4 hours, and her eyes felt heavy, her mind dulled by routine and tension, and the soft hiss of rain. At 2:31, the phone rang. Lena didn't even flinch this time. She just stared at it, letting the sound wash over her like a lullaby of dread. The laundry door opened on the monitor. The shoes were there, more than usual. The rows extended all the way to the back wall. And this time, there was something else among them. A key ring. It lay on the floor between a pair of small sneakers and a man's dress shoe. It glinted under the pale light. Lena leaned in, squinting. It looked like the same kind of key ring she carried. A metal loop with a plastic tag. The phone rang again, and the voice spoke through the line with a faint sound of amusement. "You dropped it," it said. Lena's hand went to her belt automatically. Her key ring was there. She checked it anyway, every key accounted for. But on the monitor, the key ring on the laundry room floor remained. The voice continued. "We found it. We kept it safe." Lena's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The voice softened, as if offering comfort. "Come see," it said. "Just for a moment. Just so you know what we do with what gets left behind." Lena stared at the other door in the laundry room, the one labeled "Return Items Here." The thought of walking into that bright, humming room made her stomach twist. But the thought of not knowing, of sitting at the desk night after night, watching shoes appear and disappear, hearing a voice that sounded closer each time, was its own kind of torture. She stood up. Her chair rolled back with a small squeal. The sound echoed. On the cameras, the laundry room door widened, as if responding. The lobby felt suddenly larger, emptier. The vending machine lights seemed dim. The aquarium glass reflected her face back at her, pale and strained. She walked to the keyboard and lifted the Laundry A key again. Her fingers closed around it with a certainty that didn't feel like hers. She left the lobby and stepped into the rain. The courtyard path to Building A was slick, shining under the yellow lights. Trees dripped. Wind pushed at her jacket. The complex was quiet, most residents asleep. Her footsteps sounded too loud, each one a small admission. As she approached Building A, she saw that the laundry room door was indeed slightly open. In real life, not on the monitor. A thin line of pale light spilled out onto the wet concrete. Lena stopped at the bottom of the steps. Her heart was beating hard, and for the first time since taking the job, she felt the full animal fear of being somewhere she couldn't control. She climbed anyway. The door opened wider when she reached it, without her touching it. The hinges moved with no squeak, smooth and oiled. Inside, the room was bright and cold. The machines sat in rows, silent, their metal faces dull. The shoes lined the floor exactly as she'd seen on the monitor. Dozens of them, arranged neatly, toes pointing inward. Lena's throat tightened. She had to force herself to breathe. The air smelled like detergent and something faintly sweet underneath, like fabric stored too long in a plastic bin. The phone rang again. Not the lobby phone. A wall phone mounted beside the far door, an old beige handset with a curled cord, began to ring. Lena stared at it. The sound was louder here, sharper, as if it belonged in this room more than anywhere else. It rang 3 times, then stopped. The far door, the one not on the map, stood slightly ajar. A soft hum came from beyond it, lower than the fluorescent lights. A vibration she felt in her bones. Lena stepped forward without meaning to. Her shoes splashed gently in the puddles that had somehow formed on the laundry room floor, as if the rain followed her in. The water was cold. The key ring lay where she'd seen it, between the shoes. She bent and picked it up. It was heavier than her own. The tag was faded, but she could read the label. Lobby C. Her breath stopped. This wasn't hers. It wasn't a spare key. It was a key ring like hers, from the same board, from the same building. And someone had dropped it here. Someone who worked nights. Someone who had, at some point, answered the invitation. Behind her, the laundry room door closed, not slammed, not locked, just gently shut, as if to keep the rain out. Lena turned, her hand tightening around the key ring. She tried the handle. It didn't move. The far door opened a little wider. The pale sleeve drifted out again, and this time it was attached to an arm. A thin forearm, pale as paper, with a wrist that looked bruised in a ring. The hand beckoned, not urgently, not threateningly, patiently, as if Lena had all the time in the world. And somehow, standing in that bright, humming room surrounded by shoes, she realized the truth in a way that felt less like discovery and more like remembering. Brook Hollow didn't just have tenants. It had turnover. People came in. People vanished. Keys got left behind. Shoes got left neatly on the floor. And somewhere beyond that door was a place for what couldn't be kept, what couldn't be explained, what couldn't be sent to a hospital or a morgue without questions. A place that stayed open for those who worked when the world slept. Lena's knees felt weak. She wanted to run, to scream, to force the door open with her shoulder until it splintered. But the fear wasn't the only thing inside her. There was also the tiredness. The deep bone tiredness of someone who had been holding her life together with rules and schedules and temporary jobs that never ended. The hand beckoned again. Lena took one step toward the far door, then another. The hum grew louder. The air beyond the threshold smelled like bleach and cold metal and something older, like damp stone. She reached the doorway and looked in. The room beyond was not a room. It was a hallway, long and straight, lined with doors on either side. All of them white, all of them slightly stained, like old hospital paint. And at the end of the hallway, far away but perfectly visible, was a desk. A familiar desk, a lobby desk with a bank of monitors. And behind that desk, sitting in the glow of the screens, was a woman in a security jacket. Her hair was pulled back, her shoulders were slightly hunched, her eyes looked tired. She lifted her head as Lena watched, as if sensing the gaze. And Lena saw, with cold certainty, that the woman was her. Not exactly her as she was now. Older, perhaps, more drained. A faint scar along one cheek that Lena didn't have. But the same face, the same posture, the same sense of quiet resignation. The woman, Lena, reached toward a phone on the desk and lifted the receiver. The sound of ringing filled the hallway, vibrating in Lena's teeth. Lena's own phone rang in her pocket, sudden and impossible, even though she hadn't brought it out with her. She felt it buzzing against her thigh like a trapped insect. The woman at the desk spoke into the receiver, her voice traveling down the long hallway like breath. "Laundry's full," she said, calm as rain. Lena couldn't move. The hand beside her wrist touched her gently, not grabbing, just resting. A contact so light it felt like a promise. In that moment, Lena understood what the note in the binder meant. You are not paid enough to be remembered. Brook Hollow didn't kill you quickly. It didn't tear you apart. It hired you. It gave you a chair and a binder and a set of keys. And when you were tired enough, when the hours were long enough, when you finally walked into the laundry room and picked up what someone else had dropped, it moved you into the next shift, the next desk, the next hallway, the next place that existed behind doors, not on the map. Lena wanted to refuse. She wanted to throw the key ring back onto the shoes and pound on the door and promise herself she'd never work another night in her life. But her body was tired. Her mind was soft with sleep deprivation and rain and the hum that seemed to rock her like a lullaby. The hand withdrew. The hallway waited. Lena took a slow breath. Then she stepped over the threshold. The laundry room behind her went silent. The door clicked shut, not a lock, just a gentle closing, as if everything were being kept neat. Lena walked down the long hallway toward the desk where she sat, where she would sit, where she already was, answering the phone politely after 2:30. As she approached, she saw more details. The monitors showed familiar feeds. Pool gate, parking lot east, stairwell C2. Laundry A. And on the laundry A screen, she saw herself standing in the laundry room, her hand reaching for the key ring on the floor. A loop, a pattern. The woman behind the desk, her, watched with eyes that held no surprise, only patience. The kind of patience you get when you've already lived the moment you're watching. Lena reached the desk. The phone rang. She lifted the receiver because her hand knew what to do. Her voice came out calm, conversational, even gentle. "Hello?" she said. There was a pause on the line, the soft sound of breathing. Then a voice, familiar in its intimacy, spoke back. "We need you to open it," it said. Lena looked at the monitors. Laundry A's door opened. Shoes appeared on the floor. The pale light hummed. Lena nodded once, as if agreeing to a routine task. She set the receiver down without answering further. She opened the binder and turned to a page labeled Incidents. She picked up a pen and wrote the time. 2:31. Everything normal. And somewhere, in the lobby of Building C, a phone began to ring. Waiting for the next tired person to decide whether rules mattered more than curiosity, whether temporary jobs ever truly ended, whether a door that opens politely might still lead somewhere you can't come back from. The rain fell softly outside. The lights buzzed. The building listened. And Lena Harper, now part of Brook Hollow's quiet machinery, sat behind the desk and waited. Story 2. When Marcus Dale agreed to cover the late shift at St. Bridget's, he didn't do it because he wanted the overtime. He did it because he couldn't stand being in his own apartment. His place was small. Third floor of a converted brick building in a city that never committed to being glamorous. The radiator hissed like it had secrets. The upstairs neighbor paced all night. The steady thump of footsteps that made Marcus's dreams feel restless, even when he managed to sleep. After the breakup, the apartment felt full of absence. Not dramatic absence. Not the kind that demanded tears and movies and long calls to friends. Just the quiet, stubborn kind that made him stand in the kitchen staring at the sink for no reason. So when the staffing coordinator at St. Bridget's Rehabilitation Hospital called and asked if he could cover midnight to 8, Marcus said yes before he thought about it. He was a respiratory therapist. His job was machines and breath, ventilators, oxygen flow, numbers on screens that told you a body was still trying. He liked the precision of it, the fact that, at least in his corner of the world, you could see cause and effect. He arrived at St. Bridget's on a Sunday night in late winter, when the air outside was cold enough to make the city feel hollow. The hospital sat on a low hill above the river, an older building with newer wings tacked on, like apologies. It had been a place for long-term recovery for decades. Stroke patients learning to walk again, people rebuilding strength after surgeries, people waiting for home. The overnight staff was skeletal. A charge nurse named Anita, who had the calm eyes of someone who'd seen too much. A janitor who moved like a ghost through hallways. One security guard at the front desk scrolling through his phone. Marcus signed in, clipped on his badge, and followed the familiar smell of disinfectant and heated air into the respiratory department. The halls were dim at that hour, lights lowered to encourage sleep. Machines beeped softly behind closed doors. Anita greeted him with a tired smile. "We're quiet tonight," she said. "Mostly." Marcus shrugged out of his jacket. "Mostly is fine." She handed him a patient list. Room 417 needs a check at 1. Room 503's on oxygen and likes to mess with his cannula. And room 312. Marcus scanned the list. Room 312 isn't in my usual rotation. Anita's smile didn't change, but something in her tone tightened. "No, it's not. But just, if the call light from 312 comes on, you don't go in." Marcus looked up. "What do you mean, don't go in?" "It's not your patient," Anita said, as if that settled it. "If the light comes on, you notify me. That's all." Marcus frowned. "Is it isolation? Infection?" Anita hesitated, then shook her head. "No, it's different." Marcus waited, expecting more explanation. None came. He took the list and started his rounds. The first few hours went by with routine calm. He checked the ventilator settings in 417, adjusted the humidifier, listened to the soft mechanical sigh of the machine doing what lungs couldn't. The patient's face was peaceful in sleep, mouth slightly open, eyes closed. In 503, a thin man with sharp cheekbones and restless hands fussed with his oxygen tube, like he was trying to untangle a thought. "Leave it alone," Marcus said gently, repositioning the cannula. "You need that." The man blinked at him, then laughed softly. "Do I?" he asked, voice raspy. "Sometimes I wonder if it's the other way around, if it needs me." Marcus smiled politely. the way you did with patients who had late-night philosophy. Try to sleep, he said. By 2 a.m., the ward settled deeper. The hospital's sounds became a soft rhythm. Beeps, distant footsteps, an elevator door sighing open and shut. Marcus sat at the respiratory desk and sipped vending machine coffee. He charted notes. He listened to the hum of the building. At 2:17, the call light for room 312 blinked on at the far end of the hallway. A small red dot on the panel. Marcus stared at it. He checked his list again. Room 312 was not assigned to him, but it was on his list anyway, handwritten at the bottom, as if added later. 312. Do not enter. Notify Anita. Marcus looked down the hall. The door to 312 sat half in shadow, a plain door with a small window. The call light blinked steadily, patient and insistent. Marcus stood, not because he intended to go in, but because he felt the pull of habit. Call lights meant help. It was wired into his body after years of work. He walked halfway down the hall before he remembered and stopped. He turned back and went to the nurse's station. Anita was there, looking at a computer screen that reflected pale light on her face. Marcus pointed down the hall. 312's light is on. Anita didn't look up right away. Her fingers paused on the keyboard. Then she sighed, stood, and picked up a small set of keys from the wall. You stay here, she said. Marcus frowned. Why? Anita's eyes met his, and in them Marcus saw something that felt out of place in a hospital. Not fear, exactly. Not superstition. More like caution the way you had around a patient who could lash out. Because, she said softly, 312 doesn't want you. Marcus started to ask what that meant, but Anita was already walking. He watched her go, keys in hand, posture straight. She didn't hurry. She moved like someone approaching a familiar, unpleasant task. The call light went off while she was still halfway there. Anita paused, looked back at Marcus, then continued anyway. She disappeared around the corner. Marcus waited at the station, feeling oddly useless. He listened. At first, there was nothing. Then, faintly, he heard Anita speaking. Her voice low, calm, not angry. Then, another voice, not Anita's. A woman's voice, thin and breathy, like wind through reeds. Marcus couldn't make out words, just the tone, the cadence of someone asking a question over and over with patient confusion. He leaned forward, trying to hear. Then the woman's voice grew clearer. Where is my breath? It whispered. Marcus's throat tightened. He glanced down the hallway again. The call light was off. The corridor looked normal. A moment later, Anita returned. Her face was the same, composed, but her eyes looked slightly glassy, like she'd held her breath too long. It's handled, she said. Marcus swallowed. What is in there? Anita looked at him for a long moment, then said, Someone who can't leave. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting, she replied, and sat back at the computer. Marcus returned to his desk, but the calm of routine had been punctured. He kept thinking about the voice. Where is my breath? The next hour passed quietly. Then at 3:06, the call light for 312 blinked on again. Marcus felt his stomach drop. He stayed at his desk, forcing himself not to look, but the blinking red dot tugged at his attention like a metronome. He waited for Anita to notice. She didn't. Marcus glanced toward the nurse's station. Anita was gone. The desk was empty. Her chair pushed slightly back as if she'd stood up quickly. Marcus stood, heart thudding. He walked to the station, looked down the hall. The red call light blinked. The door to 312 was slightly open. Just a crack, and from inside came a soft sound, like someone inhaling. A long, trembling inhale that ended in a wet, rasping cough. Marcus froze. He told himself it was a patient struggling, someone needing suction, someone choking. But the sound didn't have panic. It had hunger. Marcus looked for Anita. He checked the break room, the supply closet, the nearby patient rooms. No sign of her. The call light blinked again. Marcus went back to the hallway. He stopped at the corner, looking toward 312 from a distance. The door remained ajar. The call light glowed red above it. The sound of breathing continued, slow and uneven, like someone learning how. He should have called security. He should have paged someone. He should have stayed where he was. Instead, he found himself walking toward the door. Not quickly, not dramatically, just step by step, as if his body had made a decision his mind hadn't. He reached the door and looked through the narrow gap. The room was dark, except for the faint glow of a medical monitor. The bed was there, a shape beneath a sheet, but the sheet was not flat. It rose and fell in sharp, greedy movements, as if something under it was gulping air. The monitor's numbers were wrong. Marcus didn't know how else to describe it. He'd seen oxygen saturation readings all his life, but these were too high, too steady. A perfect line at 100% that didn't flicker or dip, like the machine had been instructed to lie. On the wall beside the bed hung a laminated sign that caught the monitor's glow. Room 312, do not provide supplemental oxygen. Marcus stared at the sign, confused. Then the sheet on the bed stopped moving. The room went still. Marcus held his breath without realizing it. From the darkness, the woman's voice spoke again, closer now, right behind the door, not from the bed, from the space between Marcus and the crack of darkness. "Is that yours?" the voice whispered. Marcus's skin went cold. He stepped back, his hand gripping the door handle, ready to pull it closed. The voice continued, soft and almost pleading. "Are you carrying breath?" Marcus tried to speak, but his throat locked. The call light blinked rapidly now, as if excited. The door swung open on its own, smooth and quiet. Marcus stumbled backward. The room's air spilled out, cold and damp, smelling faintly of river water and antiseptic. And in that open doorway stood a woman in a hospital gown, her bare feet pale against the tile. Her hair was long and wet, clinging to her cheeks. Her eyes were open too wide, their whites tinged with red, like she'd cried for years. She wasn't Anita. She wasn't anyone Marcus had seen in the hospital. Her chest moved in fast, shallow rises, but the air around her seemed to do the work, pulling and pushing, as if she was a puppet attached to invisible bellows. She looked at Marcus with an expression of careful attention. Not anger, not threat. Patient waiting. "You can hear me," she said. Marcus backed away slowly. "Where's the nurse?" he managed. The woman tilted her head, listening as if hearing something beyond Marcus's words. "The nurse," she repeated. "She came in. She had plenty. She had so much." Marcus's eyes flicked into the room. The bed was empty. No sheet, no body. Just an indentation in the mattress, as if someone had lain there for a long time and then been lifted away. The monitor still glowed with its perfect, false numbers. The woman stepped forward. Marcus's chest tightened. He suddenly became intensely aware of his own breathing, the way air entered and left his lungs without him thinking, the way it belonged to him. The woman's gaze dropped to his mouth as he inhaled. Her lips parted slightly, like a child smelling food. "Please," she said softly, and the word was so normal it made the horror sharper. "Just a little. I'm so tired of trying." Marcus turned to run. His feet moved, but the hallway seemed longer than it should. The lights above flickered, not dramatically, just briefly, as if the building blinked. He heard the soft slap of the woman's bare feet behind him, not running, walking at the same slow pace he was, as if she knew speed didn't matter. He reached the nurse's station and grabbed the phone. He dialed the internal extension for security with shaking fingers. The line clicked. Then, instead of ringing, it breathed. Marcus froze, holding the receiver to his ear. A soft inhale, then a slow exhale, like someone savoring. On the other end, the woman's voice whispered, "Don't waste it." Marcus slammed the phone down. He turned. The woman stood in the middle of the hallway, halfway between 312 and the station. She looked calm now, her shoulders relaxed, as if the chase had never happened. Behind her, room 312's call light blinked steadily. Marcus's mind scrambled for something concrete. He was a medical professional. He knew what ghosts weren't. He knew what hallucinations looked like. He knew that exhaustion could make the mind do strange things. But the air in the hallway was cold, and he could see his breath. He had never seen his breath in a hospital hallway. The woman stepped closer. Marcus took a step back. He bumped into the oxygen cart parked by the station, a portable tank with a green knob and a length of tubing. The woman's eyes fixed on it instantly. The hunger returned to her face. Marcus's heart pounded. The laminated sign in 312 flashed in his mind. "Do not provide supplemental oxygen." He didn't know why, but he understood it wasn't about medicine. It was about feeding. The woman's hand lifted toward the oxygen tank. Her fingers trembled like someone reaching for warmth. Marcus grabbed the cart and shoved it away down the hall. The wheels squealed against the tile. The woman flinched, then smiled slightly, as if amused. "Oh," she whispered. "You're careful." Marcus's lungs burned. He realized he was holding his breath again. He forced himself to exhale. The woman's nostrils flared as if she could smell it. "You work with breath," she said. "You touch it. You adjust it. You take it from machines and give it back to people." Marcus shook his head, backing away. "No, I don't give it. People breathe." The woman's smile widened, too gentle to be a threat and somehow worse for it. "Not always," she said. A door opened behind Marcus, the break room door. He spun. Anita stood there, pale, eyes wide. Her hair was slightly damp, as if she'd just come in from rain. She looked at Marcus and then at the woman, and Marcus saw in her face the exhaustion of someone who'd been dealing with this for too long. "Marcus," Anita said softly. "Don't breathe." Marcus stared at her, confused and panicked. "What?" Anita's voice trembled. "Don't let her hear you breathe. She follows it." Marcus's chest constricted immediately. Breath became impossible to ignore. Each inhale felt loud. The woman turned her head toward Anita, her expression sharpening with interest. "You're back," she said. Anita took a slow step forward, hands raised. "Go back to your room," she said, voice steady. The woman shook her head like a child refusing bedtime. "I can't sleep," she whispered. "Not when it's all around me." Anita's gaze flicked to Marcus. Her eyes said, "Hold it. Hold it as long as you can." Marcus pressed his lips together and tried. His lungs burned within seconds. panic rose like water. The woman looked at him with that patient attention. She took one more step. Marcus couldn't help it. He inhaled sharply. The woman's face changed instantly. Her eyes brightened. Her shoulders lifted as if she'd been plugged into power. She moved toward him with sudden speed. Anita grabbed a syringe from her pocket. Marcus didn't know where she'd gotten it and stepped between them. She plunged it into the woman's arm. The woman gasped. Her body jerked, not in pain, but in surprise. Her mouth opened wide, and Marcus saw something inside her throat that didn't belong. Not vocal cords, not flesh, a hollow space like an empty tube. A place where breath should have lived. The woman's eyes met Marcus's, pleading. Then her legs buckled. She collapsed onto the tile, her body going limp like a hospital gown dropped on the floor. The hallway warmed slightly, as if someone had turned the heat back on. Marcus inhaled, shaky and loud. Anita knelt beside the woman and began dragging her back toward 312 with practiced effort, as if moving a heavy patient. Marcus helped without thinking, his hands numb. The woman's skin felt cold and slightly damp, like she'd been pulled from water. They got her into 312 and onto the bed, which now seemed to hold her shape again, as if waiting. Anita pulled the sheet over her. Immediately, the sheet rose and fell in those greedy breaths. Anita grabbed the oxygen tank Marcus had pushed away and rolled it into the room, but stopped at the threshold, as if the doorway were a line she didn't want to cross. She placed the tank outside the room. Then she closed the door. The call light went off. Anita leaned against the wall, eyes closed, breathing slowly through her nose like someone calming herself after a storm. Marcus stood beside her, shaking. "What is that?" he whispered. Anita opened her eyes. "She was a patient," she said. "Years ago. Drowning accident. They revived her, over and over. She kept coming back, but something was wrong, like her body remembered water better than air." Marcus's throat tightened. "She died," Anita continued, voice flat. "But the room didn't let her go. Maybe the hospital didn't. Maybe she didn't. I don't know. All I know is she hears breathing now, and she wants it." Marcus swallowed. "Why keep her here?" Anita laughed softly, without humor. "We tried transferring her," she said. "Every time we did, the ambulance crew had incidents. People passing out, oxygen tanks emptying overnight, like she followed the breath." Anita looked at Marcus with a tired gentleness. "So we keep her in 312, she said. "We keep her quiet. We keep her fed just enough that she sleeps." Marcus stared at the closed door. He could imagine her under the sheet, gulping and gulping, trying to fill a hollow space that could never be filled. He thought about the phone, breathing when he called security. Anita's voice was quiet. "If the call light goes on," she said, "you call me. You do not go in." Marcus nodded, throat too tight to speak. The rest of the shift passed in a blur. The hospital returned to its soft rhythm. The rain outside continued. At 6 a.m., when Marcus left, the sky was pale and damp, the parking lot glossy. He sat in his car and breathed, just to feel it. In and out, his own. When he got home, his apartment felt even smaller. The radiator hissed, and for the first time in weeks, the sound made him flinch. He slept for a few hours. Then he woke, suddenly, with the taste of copper in his mouth. He sat up and listened. The apartment was quiet except for the upstairs neighbor, pacing. And beneath that, in the silence between footfalls, Marcus heard something else. A soft inhale. a slow exhale, as if someone were on the other side of his bedroom wall, listening to him breathe, patient and hungry, waiting for night to come again. Marcus didn't return to St. Bridget's. He told the staffing coordinator he couldn't do overnights anymore. He blamed stress, insomnia, his own mental health. They accepted it easily, as if they were relieved. But sometimes, late at night, when the apartment was too quiet and the radiator hissed like a whisper, Marcus would catch himself holding his breath. Not because he was afraid of what might hear it, but because somewhere deep in his tired mind, he wasn't entirely sure the sound belonged to him anymore. Story 3. Tessa Quinn had been working nights at the public high school for 3 months when the new refrigerator arrived. It showed up on a Tuesday, delivered by 2 men in gray uniforms who didn't say much beyond the minimum. They rolled it down the service hall on a dolly that squeaked with every rotation, then parked it in the faculty lounge as if it had always belonged there. The lounge already had a fridge, an old beige one that rattled and smelled faintly of old lunches. So Tessa asked the assistant principal, Mr. Lang, if it was a replacement. He stared at her for a moment like she'd asked him something personal. "It's for after-hours use," he said. "Staff only. Don't move it." That was all. Tessa was the night custodian. She vacuumed carpets that never fully held onto cleanliness, wiped down cafeteria tables that had been scratched by generations of bored teenagers, and mopped hallways that smelled like pencil shavings and old floor wax. She liked the predictable rhythm. She liked being alone in a building that, during the day, was too full of noise and expectation. At night, the school was just architecture, rows of lockers that became dull metal ribs, classrooms with stacked chairs, bulletin boards that held faded flyers for events that had already happened. A place that, for 8 hours, belonged to her and the gentle hum of the building's systems. The new refrigerator was glossy black with a stainless steel handle and a keypad that lit up when you touched it. It was too nice for the lounge. It looked like something you'd see in a showroom. The school didn't spend money on things like that, not unless there was a grant or a donor. Tessa wiped her fingerprints from the door and went back to her rounds. The first night, she didn't think about it much. The second night, she noticed the hum. Not the usual refrigerator buzz, but something lower, steadier, like a quiet engine running beneath the floor. It wasn't loud. You could miss it if you weren't paying attention. But once she noticed it, she couldn't unnotice it. She checked the lounge again around 1 a.m. The fridge's keypad glowed faintly in the dark, even though no one was there. The old beige fridge sat beside it like a tired relative. Tessa put her ear close to the new fridge. The hum deepened, and beneath it she thought she heard something else. A faint, rhythmic tapping, like fingernails against plastic. She stepped back, suddenly aware of how quiet the building was. The school's heating system cycled. Somewhere in the distance, a door settled in its frame with a soft click. She told herself it was normal. Refrigerators made sounds. Ice shifted. Pipes rattled. Still, she wrote it down in her maintenance notebook, the way she did with flickering lights and leaky faucets. Faculty lounge fridge. Odd hum. Check later. On Thursday, she arrived to find a sticky note on the fridge door. It was written in thick black marker, blocky and careful. Do not unplug. Below it, another line, smaller. If it beeps, walk away. Tessa stared at the note for a long time, the smell of lemon cleaner on her hands. She hadn't put that note there. She didn't know who had. She looked around the lounge. Empty tables, a coffee pot, a stack of paper plates, the vending machine lights blinking in their steady loop. The fridge sat quietly, as if innocent. She didn't unplug it. She didn't touch it. But her eyes kept drifting to it throughout the night, the way they did to anything in the corner of your vision that didn't quite belong. At 2:14 a.m., while she was mopping the main hallway, she heard the first beep. It came from somewhere near the faculty lounge, a single electronic chirp that cut cleanly through the quiet. Tessa froze, mop dripping slightly onto the tile. She remembered the note. If it beeps, walk away. She walked the other direction. Not fast, not running, just turning and continuing down the hall toward the gym wing, as if she had something else to do. Behind her, the fridge beeped again, then again. A series of short, impatient chirps, like a microwave finishing. Tessa kept walking. By the time she reached the gym doors, the beeping had stopped. The night went back to its usual rhythm. But something had shifted inside her. A small tension she couldn't name. The feeling that she'd been called and had refused. The next day, she didn't mention it to anyone. Day staff didn't want to hear about strange noises in the night. They wanted clean hallways and empty trash cans and no complaints. On Friday night, the faculty lounge light was on when Tessa arrived. She knew she'd turned it off the night before. She always turned it off. She stepped into the lounge and stood very still. The new fridge door was slightly open, just a crack, enough to let cold air spill out in a faint breath. The inside light was on, pale and bluish. Tessa's stomach tightened. She moved closer and looked inside. There were shelves, clean and empty, except for one thing. A lunch bag, brown paper, folded at the top, sitting neatly on the middle shelf. No name written on it, no logo, nothing. Just a bag, waiting. Tessa reached for the fridge handle, intending to close it, but her hand stopped. The air coming out of the fridge smelled wrong. Not rotten, not sour. Just cold in a way that didn't match normal refrigeration. The kind of cold you felt when you opened an old chest freezer in a basement and found something inside you didn't want to identify. The lunch bag sat perfectly still. Tessa closed the fridge door with 2 fingers and stepped back. The hum deepened immediately, as if satisfied. She turned off the lounge light and walked away. That night, she dreamed of lockers. Not the lockers in the hallway, but lockers inside the fridge, shelves that slid out like drawers, each one holding something wrapped in brown paper, each one labeled with a student's name in careful handwriting. When she woke in her small apartment the next afternoon, she couldn't remember the names, only the feeling of seeing them, the calm certainty that the fridge was keeping track. On Sunday night, the lunch bag was gone. The fridge door was closed. The sticky note remained. Do not unplug. If it beeps, walk away. Tessa tried to ignore it. She focused on her routine. Empty the trash in the art room, where clay dust coated the floor like gray snow. Wipe down the science lab counters where the smell of old chemicals lingered. Mop the cafeteria. She avoided the faculty lounge until after midnight, telling herself she didn't need to go in there. But at 1:47, she noticed the security camera monitor in the front office. Tessa wasn't supposed to use it, but the principal had shown her how to check the feeds in case of an emergency. The monitor sat on the receptionist's desk, a grid of small black and white screens showing hallways and entrances. One of the feeds was the faculty lounge. Tessa leaned in. The lounge was dark. The new fridge keypad glowed faintly, and in front of it, standing perfectly still, was a person, a student. That was Tessa's first thought, because the figure was slim and wore what looked like a hoodie. But the figure's posture was wrong, too straight, too patient. The person stood with their head tilted toward the fridge door, as if listening. Tessa's heart thudded. She grabbed her flashlight and stepped into the hallway, moving toward the lounge with the kind of adrenaline that made everything feel too bright. She reached the lounge doorway and flicked on the light. The room was empty. No student, no hoodie, just the fridge humming quietly. Tessa turned the light off, slowly, and went back to the front office. On the monitor, the lounge was empty too. She stared at the screen until her eyes ached, then wrote in her notebook, 147. Saw figure on lounge feed. Not there when checked. She didn't sleep much after that, even during the day. Her dreams became shallow, filled with fluorescent lights and the sensation of cold air against her face. By the end of the second week, the fridge had become a presence she could feel, even when she wasn't near it. The hum seemed to travel through the floor, through walls, through her bones. On Tuesday night, she found another sticky note on the fridge. This one was new. The marker ink still dark. Deliveries will arrive after 2 o'clock. Do not open bags. Tessa stared at it, her mouth dry. Deliveries. She thought about the lunch bag in the fridge. She thought about the figure she'd seen on the camera feed. She thought about all the missing posters she'd noticed over the years on utility poles and grocery store bulletin boards. Teenagers who vanished and became rumors. Kids who ran away, people said. Kids who made bad choices. In a town like this, stories were easier than truth. At 2:03 a.m., the fridge beeped. One chirp, then another. Tessa stood in the hallway outside the lounge, heart pounding, not entering. She remembered the earlier note. If it beeps, walk away. But now there were 2 notes, and they contradicted each other, and the contradiction made her feel like she was being tested. The fridge beeped again. Then the faculty lounge door, which had been shut, opened inward by itself. Just enough for her to see. The room was dark. The fridge keypad glowed. And on the floor just inside the lounge sat a brown paper lunch bag, neatly folded, as if placed there with care. The fridge beeped one more time, then fell silent. Tessa stood breathing in the hallway, not moving. The bag sat still. A delivery. The sticky note had been right. Tessa's mind tried to generate explanations. Pranks, day staff, leaving things around, security failing. But none of them accounted for the door opening like that, smooth and unhurried, as if the building itself had decided. She stepped into the lounge slowly, flashlight in hand. The cold in the room was deeper than usual. The fridge hum sounded louder now, as if aware of her presence. She approached the bag. It was just paper, just folded paper. She could see a faint grease stain on one side, like someone had packed food inside. Her fingers hovered above it. Do not open bags. The note on the fridge felt like a warning, but it also felt like a dare. Like the kind of rule that existed because someone had learned what happened when you broke it. Tessa picked up the bag without opening it and carried it to the nearest trash can. She dropped it in, then stepped back. The fridge hummed. The bag did not move. Tessa exhaled shakily. Then, very softly, from inside the trash can, she heard a sound. A muffled knock. One tap, then another, like fingernails against plastic. Tessa stepped back again. her heartbeat loud in her ears. The fridge beeped, one chirp, and on the black fridge door, something appeared, not a reflection, a word. Condensation formed letters slowly, as if someone were breathing onto the door from the inside. Open. Tessa's mouth went dry. Her hands shook. She backed away, not taking her eyes off the fridge. The word open remained, wet letters on glossy black. Then it changed. The condensation smeared, rearranged. Not the fridge. Tessa turned slowly toward the trash can. The bag inside knocked again. A soft, patient tapping. And then, from within the folded paper, came a whisper. So faint, she wondered if she imagined it. Tessa, her name, said the way someone said it when they wanted your attention without waking others. Tessa's throat constricted. She should have walked away. She should have left the bag and the fridge and gone back to her mop bucket and pretended she'd never heard anything. But the whisper had said her name, like it knew her, like it had been waiting. She approached the trash can. The bag was still there, folded. She reached in, lifted it, and held it in both hands. It was heavier now. That made no sense. It was paper. But the weight felt like something inside had shifted, as if content had been added. Tessa swallowed and opened the top fold. Inside was a sandwich, still wrapped, a neat rectangle of wax paper tied with string, and beneath it, an apple, and beneath that, a small plastic bag containing carrot sticks, a perfect school lunch. Tessa stared, confused, almost relieved. Food? Just food. Then she saw the note tucked against the side, a little piece of lined notebook paper. It was written in careful, youthful handwriting. Please take this to the nurse's office. I can't leave. The letters looked like they'd been written by a student, pressed hard enough to dent the paper. Tessa's hands trembled. The nurse's office was on the first floor. It had a little cot and cabinets and a desk with a phone. It was locked at night, but Tessa had keys to most places. She looked at the fridge. Its keypad glowed faintly. The hum seemed to deepen, like a sigh. She looked back into the bag. The lunch looked fresh, not moldy, not old, as if someone had packed it that morning, but no one should have been in the building. The doors were locked. The alarms were set. Tessa pulled the note out and read it again. I can't leave. She imagined a student trapped somewhere, locked in a room, hurt, scared. The thought was absurd, but the handwriting made her think of kids she'd seen in the hallway during the day. Quiet ones. The ones who ate lunch alone. The nurse's office. Maybe the student thought the nurse could help. Tessa tied the bag shut again, held it like a fragile thing, and left the lounge. As she walked through the dark hallway, the fluorescent lights seemed to buzz louder. The building felt colder. She reached the nurse's office and unlocked it. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and old tissues. The cot was folded against the wall. A poster about hand washing hung crookedly. Tessa set the lunch bag on the nurse's desk. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the desk phone rang. Tessa froze. The sound was abrupt and wrong, too loud in the quiet room. She stared at the phone. It rang again, and somehow she knew, with a certainty that felt like dread settling into her bones, that if she answered it, she would be stepping into something she couldn't undo. She let it ring. The phone stopped. The air in the room grew colder. The cabinet doors along the wall, the ones with supplies, began to click softly, one by one, as if someone were testing them. Tessa backed toward the door, heart racing. Behind her, the lunch bag rustled, a soft sound like paper shifting. Tessa turned. The bag was still on the desk, but the top fold had opened. The string had untied itself. Inside, the wax paper around the sandwich was peeling back, slowly, by invisible fingers, as if someone unseen were showing her what was inside. Tessa stared, breath caught. The sandwich was not a sandwich. It was a neat stack of something pale and thin, pressed between bread. Not meat, not cheese, paper. Dozens of folded slips of paper, layered like deli slices. Tessa stepped closer without meaning to. On each slip of paper was handwriting, different handwriting, some messy, some careful, some scratched out. Names, dates, short messages. Please tell my mom I didn't run away. I'm in the basement. The fridge is where they put what they don't want found. Don't answer the phone. The slips of paper shifted as if something beneath them breathed. The cabinet doors clicked again, harder, impatient. The desk phone rang once more, and in the ringing, Tessa heard something else. A faint chorus of voices layered under the electronic sound, like a crowd whispering in unison. "Help us," they said, barely audible. Tessa's skin went cold. She backed toward the door again, her hands shaking. The lunch bag sat open, its contents exposed. The voices whispered again, soft and patient. "Help us." Tessa ran. She left the nurse's office, the door swinging behind her. She ran down the hall toward the front office, where the security camera monitor glowed in the dark. She needed to see. She needed to understand. She reached the monitor and slammed her hand on the desk to steady herself, staring at the grid of feeds. Faculty lounge. The fridge. The lounge was lit now, the overhead lights glowing though she hadn't turned them on. And in front of the fridge stood a row of students. Not moving, not blinking. Just standing shoulder to shoulder, facing the fridge door, as if waiting to be called. Their faces were dim on the black and white feed, but Tessa could see enough to recognize that some of them were wearing old-fashioned clothes. Some wore current school hoodies. Some looked younger than high school. The line extended out of frame. Tessa's mouth went dry. Then, on the monitor, the fridge door opened. The pale light spilled out, and one by one, the students stepped forward and disappeared inside, as if the fridge were not an appliance, but a doorway. Tessa watched, frozen, as the line moved slowly, patiently. The feed flickered. For a moment, the camera showed not the lounge, but a different place. A long hallway of white tile and fluorescent lights, rows of metal tables. A place that looked like an old-school basement lab, repurposed. Then the feed snapped back. The lounge was empty. The fridge door was closed. The overhead lights turned off. And the hum deepened, satisfied. Tessa stood in the dark front office, shaking, understanding, finally, what she'd been refusing to see. The fridge wasn't for food. It was for names, for messages that couldn't be delivered, for people who couldn't leave, for whatever the school, over decades, had decided to keep cold and hidden until it forgot, until the town forgot, until the world moved on and stopped asking. Tessa thought of the notes in the paper sandwich. The fridge is where they put what they don't want found. She thought of the instruction, "Do not open bags." She thought of the second instruction she'd ignored by coming to the nurse's office at all. She could leave right now. She could walk out into the night, into the rain, and never come back. But the voices in the ringing had said, "Help us." And in the monitor feed, she had seen students lined up like they were waiting for something promised. Tessa went to her maintenance notebook with shaking hands and opened it to a fresh page. She wrote down everything she'd seen in careful detail. Times, images, words. She wrote until her hand cramped, because writing felt like the only thing she could do that might matter. At 5:30 a.m., when the day staff began arriving, she stood in the lobby and watched them come in smiling tiredly, carrying coffee, talking about their weekend plans. She wanted to grab someone, Mr. Lang, Marcia, any adult with authority, and shake them until they admitted what they knew. Instead, she took her notebook, closed it, and put it in her backpack. She went home at 6. She didn't sleep. She sat at her kitchen table and watched dawn lighten the window, listening to her own refrigerator hum. When the school day began, she drove to the county sheriff's office and asked to speak to someone. The deputy at the front desk looked at her with polite boredom. Tessa told him she had information about missing students, about evidence. He sighed, as if she were one more person with one more story, then handed her a form. She filled it out. She waited. An hour later, a detective named Harris came out and led her to a small interview room. He offered her water. Tessa opened her notebook and began to speak. As she described the fridge, the bags, the notes, Detective Harris's face shifted from boredom to something else, something tighter. Not surprise, recognition. When she mentioned room numbers, he pressed his lips together. When she said the words the notes had contained, "Please tell my mom I didn't run away," his eyes flicked to the door as if checking it. Tessa felt her stomach sink. "You know," she whispered. Detective Harris didn't answer right away. Finally, he said quietly, "You shouldn't have come in here with that." Tessa stared. "What?" He leaned forward, voice low. "You should have walked away," he said. "That's what they told you, right? Walk away when it beeps." Tessa's throat tightened. "Who told you?" The detective sat back and rubbed his face. He looked tired, older suddenly. "People have tried," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Over the years. Custodians, teachers, a counselor once. Everybody sees something eventually. But they never have enough, or they have too much, and it goes missing." Tessa's hands shook. "So do something." Detective Harris's expression was something close to sorrow. He stood and opened the interview room door. "Come with me," he said. Tessa followed him down the hall to a storage area behind the offices. He unlocked a door and turned on the light. Inside were shelves filled with boxes, evidence boxes, each one labeled with case numbers. Missing persons. Old, new, stacked like a quiet monument. Detective Harris pointed to one shelf. On it sat a brown paper lunch bag, folded neatly at the top. A sticky note on it in black marker. "Do not open." Tessa's breath caught. "You keep them here," she whispered. "You keep the bags." Harris nodded once. "Sometimes," he said, "they show up on desks, in cars, in lockers, like someone is trying to deliver something." He looked at Tessa, finally meeting her eyes. "And sometimes," he said softly, "the fridge hum shows up in places it shouldn't, and people start hearing beeps in their sleep." Tessa stared at the lunch bag, realizing the truth wasn't contained to the school. It had spread. It had always been spreading. She thought of the students lining up at the fridge door, walking into pale light. She thought of the paper slips stacked like meat in a sandwich. The voices had been trying to get out for a long time, and everyone who heard them had been told over and over to walk away. Detective Harris turned off the storage light and closed the door again. "It's better," he said quietly, "if you go home and forget." Tessa shook her head, tears burning her eyes. "I can't," he sighed. Then you'll start hearing the hum everywhere, he said. And one night you'll wake up and find a bag on your kitchen counter. Tessa went home anyway. She locked her apartment door. She unplugged her refrigerator. She sat in the quiet and waited for her own fear to calm. For a while, it did. Then, at 2:14 a.m., her phone beeped. One chirp, then another. Her stomach tightened. She didn't look. She stared at the wall, holding her breath, because that had become her new instinct. In the kitchen, something hummed, low and steady, like a door that was never meant to exist, patiently waiting for someone to open it again. Story 4. Evan Rourke moved into the old house on Laurel Avenue because it was cheap and because the landlord didn't ask questions. It was a narrow 2-story in a small city in the Pacific Northwest, pressed between newer homes like something forgotten. The paint was flaking, and the porch sagged slightly. A row of tall fir trees behind the backyard kept the place in shade for most of the day. Evan liked the shade. He liked quiet places. After his mother's death, quiet was all he could stand. He was 31 recently, divorced and working from home as a customer service trainer for a company that promised friendliness in scripts. His days were full of voices that weren't real, people reading lines, people trying to sound human. His nights were empty. The house on Laurel Avenue gave him a way to be alone without feeling watched by his own memories. At least, that was what he told himself. The landlord, a soft-spoken man named Mr. Dwyer, handed Evan the keys and pointed at the basement door. "Don't go down there," he said, as casually as someone warning you about a loose step. Evan blinked. "Is it unsafe?" Mr. Dwyer hesitated, then nodded. "Old wiring," he said, "and there's a room at the bottom. It stays locked. Just leave it alone." Evan had lived long enough to know that any sentence that began with "just" meant the opposite of simple. But he needed the house, and he didn't have energy for arguments, so he nodded and took the keys. The first week went by in a quiet routine. Evan set up his desk in the dining room, where sunlight filtered weakly through lace curtains. He made coffee. He unpacked boxes slowly, letting his life settle into new shapes. At night, rain often pattered on the roof, soft and steady. The neighborhood was calm, full of families and older couples who went to bed early. Evan slept, finally, without waking every hour. Then he noticed the smell. It wasn't always there. It came and went like a mood. A faint sweetness, like fruit left too long in a bowl. Not rotten, just overly ripe. The kind of smell that made you think of something turning in the dark. He searched the kitchen for forgotten food. He scrubbed the trash can. He checked under the sink. The smell remained, drifting through the house in slow waves. It seemed strongest near the basement door. Evan avoided the basement. He told himself he was respecting the landlord's warning. He told himself it wasn't his problem. But curiosity is a quiet hunger. It doesn't scream. It waits. On a rainy Thursday, while Evan was working late, he heard a soft sound from beneath the floor. A knock, one tap, then another. He froze at his desk, headset still. Around his neck, the house was quiet except for the rain and the refrigerator's low hum. The knock came again. 3 taps, evenly spaced. Evan swallowed, his mouth dry. Pipes, he told himself. Old houses made noises. Then he heard it again, closer, more deliberate. And this time, it wasn't a knock on wood. It sounded like knuckles on a door. Evan stood up slowly and walked to the hallway where the basement door was. The door was painted white, slightly scuffed. It had a simple knob and a deadbolt above it. He stared at it, listening. The knocking stopped. Evan exhaled. Then, from behind the door, he heard a voice. Very soft. So soft he almost missed it. "Evan," the voice said. His name. Spoken with a familiarity that made his skin go cold. Evan stepped back, heart pounding. He hadn't told anyone his first name since moving in. The landlord had the lease, but it was typed. No one in the neighborhood knew him yet. He pressed his ear closer to the door, against his better judgment. Silence. Then, again. "Evan," the voice whispered. "Let me out." Evan's throat tightened. "Who is this?" he managed. The voice didn't answer immediately. When it did, it sounded like someone trying to remember how to talk. "It's cold," it said. "It's dark. I can't see the words anymore." Evan felt his stomach twist. What words? A pause. Then the voice spoke with a faint note of frustration, like a person trying to describe something obvious. "The ones you write," it said. "The ones you say out loud. The ones that make things happen." Evan stepped back. His mind searched for meaning and found only confusion and dread. He turned and walked away from the basement door, forcing himself to return to his desk. He put his headset back on. He resumed work. He spoke into the microphone in his professional tone, reading scripts about empathy and resolution. But his voice shook slightly. And in the silence between calls, he kept hearing the soft tapping beneath the floor. That night, Evan tried to sleep, but the house felt different. The darkness seemed thicker. The rain sounded louder, like 100 fingers tapping the roof. At 3:11 a.m., he woke to the sound of footsteps downstairs. Slow, careful steps moving through the kitchen. Evan lay still, heart racing. He listened. The steps stopped near the basement door. A soft click, then another, as if someone were trying the locks. Evan held his breath. The locks didn't open. The footsteps moved away. Evan stayed in bed until morning, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince himself it was a dream. In the daylight, the house looked normal again. Dust in sunbeams, old wood, quiet rooms. But the smell returned, stronger in the afternoon, pooling near the basement door like something waiting. Evan called Mr. Dwyer. He didn't mention the voice. He didn't mention his name being spoken. He just said he'd heard noises and wanted to make sure the door was secure. Mr. Dwyer was quiet for a moment on the phone. Then he said, "Did it talk to you?" Evan's blood went cold. "What?" Mr. Dwyer sighed, the sound of someone tired of living with a secret. "I told you not to go down there," he said. "It gets restless. It wants attention." Evan's voice came out thin. "What is it?" Mr. Dwyer paused, then said carefully, "It's a room that holds what people leave behind when they want to forget." Evan didn't understand, but he felt the shape of the answer like a shadow. Mr. Dwyer continued, "The door at the bottom stays locked. You leave it alone, no matter what you hear." Evan's throat tightened. "Has someone been—" "Don't," Mr. Dwyer interrupted. "Don't ask." Then he hung up. That night, Evan stayed out late, sitting in his car in a parking lot with the radio on low, just to avoid being in the house after dark. He returned around midnight, rain dripping from the trees, the street empty. Inside, the house was quiet. He locked the front door, checked the windows, and stood in the hallway listening. Nothing. Evan went to bed, exhausted. At 2:02 a.m., he woke to the sound of the basement door opening. Not a slam, a slow creak. Evan sat up, eyes wide in the dark. He heard footsteps on the stairs leading down. Not up, down, as if someone were going into the basement. Then a soft, satisfied sigh, and a whisper that slid through the house like cold air. "Finally," it said. Evan's skin prickled. He got out of bed, moved to the top of the stairs, and looked down into the dark hallway. The basement door stood open, a black rectangle of space. Evan's heart hammered. He hadn't opened it. He hadn't even touched it. He stared at the open doorway. The smell of ripe sweetness drifted up, thick and warm, and from below, the voice spoke again, not whispering now, speaking in a calm, almost conversational tone. "You don't have to be alone," it said. Evan swallowed, his throat tight. "Who are you?" A pause, then a soft laugh. Not cruel, just amused, as if Evan had asked a question with an obvious answer. "I'm what's left," it said. "I'm what stays when you go." Evan's hands trembled. He should have closed the door. He should have backed away. Instead, he stepped closer, drawn by the same quiet hunger that had led him to rent this house, to seek shade and silence. He walked down the hallway toward the basement door. The air grew colder with each step. The open doorway seemed to breathe. Evan reached the threshold and looked down the basement stairs. They descended into darkness. The faintest glow came from the bottom, like candlelight. Evan's heart pounded. He took one step down. The wood creaked beneath his weight. The smell thickened. He took another step. The darkness below seemed to shift, like something turning its head. From the bottom of the stairs, a soft light flickered, revealing a narrow basement hallway, and, at the end of it, a door. A heavy door, iron-banded, locked, and on it, painted in fading letters, a phrase Evan felt rather than read. "Keep what you've written." Evan's breath caught. He didn't remember writing anything like that, but the words made his chest ache with recognition, like a line from a script he'd read so many times he could recite it without seeing it. The voice drifted up again, gentle. "Come down," it said. "You'll remember." Evan took another step, then another. He moved slowly, not rushing, as if trying not to wake something. At the bottom of the stairs, the basement hallway stretched longer than it should. The walls were unfinished concrete, damp and cold. The air felt thick, like it held too much. The light came from a single lamp on a table beside the locked door. An old green-shaded lamp, its glow soft and sickly. On the table sat a notebook. Evan's stomach twisted. It was his notebook, the one he used at work for training notes, for scripts, for phrases he wanted to remember. He hadn't brought it down here. He picked it up with trembling hands. It was open to a page. Words were written across it in his handwriting, but he didn't remember writing them. The ink was fresh. Evan read the first line. "Dear Evan, I am sorry for what I did to you when you were small. I am sorry for leaving you alone in the dark. I am sorry for teaching you to be quiet so no one would notice you. I am sorry for making you feel like silence was safety." Evan's breath stopped. His chest tightened painfully, like a fist closing around his heart. Those were not work notes. Those were confessions, apologies. The kind of words his mother had never said, not in life, not in the hospital room. When Evan held her hand and waited for her to speak, the voice behind him, no longer below, but close, right at his shoulder, whispered softly. "See," it said, "you know how to write what people won't say." Evan turned. In the dim basement light, something stood behind him. It had the shape of a person, but not the clarity. Its edges blurred slightly, like someone seen through rain-streaked glass. Its face was pale and smooth, without details, except for its mouth. Its mouth was too clear, too defined, lips slightly parted as if waiting to speak. "Who are you?" Evan whispered again. The thing leaned closer. Its mouth moved, and Evan's mother's voice came out. Not a recording, not a memory. Her exact voice, the one he hadn't heard in 2 years, the one that could still make him feel like a child. "Baby," it said softly. Evan's knees nearly buckled. Tears flooded his eyes. The thing smiled gently, wearing his mother's voice like a warm coat. "I've been waiting," it said, "down here, where the words live." Evan clutched the notebook to his chest, shaking. "This isn't real," he whispered. The thing tilted its head. "Isn't it?" it asked, still in her voice. "You've been writing scripts all day, teaching people what to say so the world feels smoother. You know words can make things happen." Evan's throat tightened. "What do you want?" The thing's smile widened slightly. "I want you to keep writing," it said. "Write what you need to hear. Write what you need to happen. Write the apologies you never got. Write the love that never came." Evan's mind scrambled. The notebook in his hands was open, waiting. The pen lay on the table beside the lamp. And suddenly, Evan understood the smell in the house, that sweet, turning scent. It was the smell of old words, kept too long, fermenting in dark places until they became something else. The thing stepped back, gesturing toward the notebook. Patient. "Right," it whispered. Evan's hand moved before he decided. He picked up the pen. His fingers wrapped around it with a certainty that didn't feel like his own. He bent over the notebook, tears dripping onto the page. The pen touched paper, and Evan began to write. Not training scripts, not polite phrases. He wrote the words he had carried in his chest for years. He wrote his mother's apology. He wrote his father's absence. He wrote his ex-wife's final sentence, the one that had ended their marriage like a door closing. As he wrote, the basement air warmed slightly, as if the room were breathing with him. The thing behind him listened, still and patient, like a confessor. When Evan finished a paragraph, the thing spoke in his mother's voice. "Yes," it said softly. "That's right." Evan wrote more. Hours passed without him noticing. The lamp glow stayed steady. The locked door behind the table seemed to hum faintly now, as if responding to the words. When Evan finally stopped, his hand cramped, his eyes swollen. The notebook pages were filled. The thing stepped closer and placed a hand on Evan's shoulder. Its touch was cold, but comforting in a terrible way, like the chill of a drink when you're thirsty. "You've done well," it whispered. Evan's voice came out, hoarse. "What happens now?" The thing looked toward the locked door. "Now," it said, "you put it in." Evan stared at the door, dread rising. "Put what in?" he whispered, though he already knew. "The words," the thing said gently. "You don't get to keep them. That's the deal. You write what you need, then you give it to me. You leave it in the room so you can go upstairs and sleep." Evan's throat tightened. "No." The thing's smile faded slightly. "You don't want to carry them anymore," it said. "That's why you came here. That's why you rented this house. You wanted somewhere to put what you couldn't keep." Evan's chest heaved. He thought of his sleepless nights, his empty apartment before this, the way grief had followed him like a shadow. The notebook felt heavy in his hands. The locked door waited. The thing behind him whispered again, softer. "Let it go." Evan's hands trembled. He stepped toward the door. The iron bands were cold. The lock looked old and complicated. He didn't have a key, but when he reached for the handle, it opened anyway. The door swung inward with a slow sigh. Beyond it was darkness, not empty darkness. A darkness that smelled of paper and ink and ripe sweetness. Evan held the notebook out, his arms shaking. The darkness moved. Something inside reached for the notebook with invisible hands. The pages fluttered as if in a breeze. Evan felt the notebook being pulled from his grip. He let go. The darkness took it. The door swung shut gently. The lock clicked. Evan stood in the basement, shaking, feeling lighter and emptier at the same time. The thing behind him whispered in his mother's voice. "Go upstairs," it said. "Sleep." Evan turned and walked up the stairs, his legs heavy, his mind dull. When he reached the top, the basement door closed behind him by itself. The house was quiet. The rain outside had stopped. Evan went to bed and slept deeply, without dreams. In the morning, he woke with a strange calm, a blankness. He sat at his kitchen table and realized he couldn't quite remember what he'd written. He knew he'd cried. He knew he'd been in the basement. But the words were gone from his mind like water running through fingers. The relief felt immediate. So did the horror, because he understood now. The room at the bottom of the basement was a place where you could put your pain, a place where you could write what you needed and then forget it, a place that fed on words and gave you sleep in exchange. And if you did it once, if you tasted that relief, you would want to do it again. That night, Evan tried not to go down. He tried to distract himself with television, with cooking, with pacing the house. But the smell returned, sweet and patient. At 3:11 a.m., he heard a knock beneath the floor. 3 taps, evenly spaced. Evan sat up in bed, heart pounding, and listened to the voice whisper his name. "Evan," it said softly. "I have more." Evan's hand moved toward the edge of the bed. He stopped himself. He lay back, staring at the ceiling, breathing hard. The voice waited, then whispered, gentle as rain. "You're tired," it said. "Come right." Evan closed his eyes, and slowly he began to understand the true shape of the landlord's warning. It wasn't that the basement was unsafe. It was that the room at the bottom did what it promised. It took what you wrote, and it made sure you always had more to give. Story 5. Noah Vance didn't mind night work. He actually preferred it most days. When you stock shelves at a 24-hour pharmacy, the overnight shift is quieter, slower, and less complicated. People come in for late prescriptions, cough syrup, diapers. A few wander the aisles like they're trying to remember why they got in their car in the first place. The fluorescent lights stay the same, the music stays low, and the world feels muted. Noah liked muted. He was 28, recently sober, and the day shift crowds made him feel like he was walking through a constant test. People's impatience, their sharp voices, their casual rudeness. It all scraped at him. At night, he could breathe. The pharmacy sat on the edge of a small city in Arizona, the kind of place where the suburbs melted into open land, and the air smelled of dust even after rain. The store was part of a strip of businesses, an empty pet grooming shop, a thrift store that closed at 5, a donut place that never stayed open longer than a year. Noah worked from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., 5 nights a week. He stocked. He faced products so labels lined up neatly. He cleaned spills before anyone complained. He liked the way order could be created in small ways. On his second week, the night pharmacist, Dr. Kim, warned him about the freezer. It was a tall, upright medical freezer in a back storage room used for vaccines and temperature-sensitive shipments. It had a digital display, a lock, and a quiet alarm that would beep if the temperature fluctuated. "It's touchy," Dr. Kim said, scanning a box of syringes. "Don't leave it open, and if it alarms, tell me." Noah nodded. Then Dr. Kim added, almost as an afterthought, "And don't take anything out of the bottom drawer." Noah blinked. Bottom drawer? Dr. Kim's eyes remained on the inventory sheet. "Just don't," she said. "It's not for us." Noah wanted to ask what that meant, but he could hear the warning beneath her calm tone. The way adults spoke when they'd made peace with something strange and wanted you to make peace too. So he nodded again. The freezer stayed in the back room behind a door labeled "Employees Only." It hummed softly, steady as a heartbeat. Noah walked past it a dozen times a night, pushing carts of supplies, carrying trash bags, retrieving boxes from shelves. He didn't think about the bottom drawer until the first time he heard it move. It was 3:18 a.m., the slowest time of the night, when the store felt like it was holding its breath. Noah was alone on the sales floor, facing the cough medicine aisle. Dr. Kim was in the pharmacy area, checking prescriptions. The security guard, a tired man named Roland, sat at the front desk, watching cameras. Noah heard a low, metallic scrape from the back. Not a loud crash, not a bang. Just the sound of a heavy drawer shifting an inch, then settling. Noah froze, box of lozenges in his hands. The store's air conditioning sighed. A refrigerator in the drinks aisle clicked on. Everything else was still. Noah walked toward the back room, not rushing. He told himself it was probably the freezer cycling, a component moving, an ice buildup shifting. He opened the back room door and stepped inside. The freezer's digital display glowed green, temperature normal, the hum steady, no alarm. Noah stared at it for a long moment, then turned away, embarrassed by his own nerves. He closed the door and went back to the aisle. At 3:21, the freezer alarm beeped once, a single chirp. Noah's stomach tightened. He waited for it to beep again. It didn't. He walked to the pharmacy window and tapped lightly. Dr. Kim looked up. "What's up?" "The freezer chirped," Noah said. Dr. Kim's face remained neutral, but her eyes tightened slightly. "Did you open it?" "No." Dr. Kim nodded. "Okay, don't worry. Just, if it beeps more than once, tell me." Noah nodded, unease spreading like cold water. For the rest of the week, it didn't happen again. Noah began to think he'd imagined it. Then, on a rainy Tuesday, rare rain that made the parking lot shine black and made the desert smell briefly alive, the freezer alarm chirped twice, 2 short beeps, one after the other. Noah was in the stockroom when it happened. The sound came from behind the freezer door like a bird call, too crisp. He waited, holding his breath. Dr. Kim emerged from the pharmacy area almost immediately, as if she'd been standing behind him. "You heard it," she said, not a question. Noah nodded. Dr. Kim walked to the freezer and placed her, palm on the door, as if feeling for vibration. The display still showed normal. No alarm light. Dr. Kim's hand stayed there for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "Noah, did anyone come back here?" "No," he whispered. Dr. Kim exhaled and removed her hand. She took a key from her pocket, unlocked the freezer, and opened it. Cold air spilled out, sharp and clean. She didn't check the top shelves. She didn't inspect the boxes. She went straight to the bottom drawer. Noah watched her pull it open. Inside, there was a white plastic container the size of a shoebox, with a sealed lid and a label that had been partially peeled away. Noah could make out only 2 words: returned, and beneath it, do not reissue. Dr. Kim stared at it, jaw set. She reached in, lifted the container, and held it like something heavy. Noah's throat tightened. "What is it?" Dr. Kim didn't answer. She set the container back, slid the drawer shut, and closed the freezer. She locked it again. Then she looked at Noah, her expression tired. "If you hear it beep twice again," she said, "call me. Don't check it. Don't open it. Don't be curious." Noah swallowed. "Is it dangerous?" Dr. Kim's eyes flicked, toward the freezer, then back. "It's not dangerous if you don't give it what it wants," she said. Noah felt his skin go cold. "What does it want?" Dr. Kim shook her head. "Just don't," she said, and walked away. That night, Noah couldn't stop thinking about the container in the bottom drawer. Returned. Do not reissue. A medical freezer held vaccines, blood, samples. Returned could mean a recalled medication, a spoiled shipment. But why label it like that? Why keep it in the bottom drawer with a warning? Noah tried to focus on his tasks, but as the hours passed, he began to notice other things. Customers who came in at strange times and didn't buy anything. A woman in a raincoat standing by the greeting cards, staring at the sympathy section without moving. A man in a hoodie lingering near the pharmacy window, watching Dr. Kim through the glass. They weren't threatening. They were just waiting. And waiting, Noah learned, could feel like pressure. At 4:02 a.m., the freezer alarm beeped twice again. Noah's heart hammered. He walked quickly to the pharmacy window. Dr. Kim was already looking at him. She didn't need the message. She stepped out, grabbed her keys, and went to the back room. Noah followed, staying a few feet behind. Dr. Kim unlocked the freezer and opened it. Cold air rolled out. She pulled open the bottom drawer. The white container was still there. But the lid had shifted. Not open. Just slightly misaligned, as if someone had twisted it and stopped. Dr. Kim's face went pale. She reached for the container and her hand hesitated a fraction of a second, like she was afraid to touch it. Then she lifted it out. She held it at chest height. Noah could see her fingers tightening. From inside the container, a faint sound emerged, a soft tapping. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps, pause, 3 taps, like a pattern, like something trying to communicate. Noah's mouth went dry. Dr. Kim. Dr. Kim's voice was strained. "Go to the front," she said. "Get Roland. Tell him to shut the store for 10 minutes. Noah stared. "What?" "Just do it," she snapped, then softened. "Please." Noah turned and ran to the front desk. Roland looked up lazily. "What's wrong?" Noah swallowed. "Dr. Kim says close the store for 10 minutes. Roland frowned, then his eyes sharpened. "Freezer?" Noah nodded. Roland's expression changed instantly, as if a mask slipped. He stood quickly. "Lock the front doors," he said, and moved with sudden urgency. Noah did as told, flipping the sign to temporarily closed and locking the sliding doors. The store, usually open to late-night wanderers, suddenly felt sealed. Roland walked briskly toward the back. Noah followed, heart pounding. In the back room, Dr. Kim stood holding the container. She looked like someone holding a living animal that might bite. Roland stopped in the doorway and exhaled sharply. "It's awake," he said. Dr. Kim's jaw tightened. "It's been beeping twice," she said. "Twice, like last time." Roland nodded. "Did it shift?" Dr. Kim held the container up slightly. "It's tapping." Roland stepped closer, eyes on the lid. "It wants out," he said quietly. Noah's skin prickled. "What is this?" he demanded, voice shaking. "What are you talking about?" Dr. Kim looked at him, her eyes tired and resigned. "It's a return," she said softly. "A patient return." Noah stared. "That doesn't... People don't..." Roland interrupted gently. "Sometimes," he said, "people don't stay where they're supposed to after they die." Noah's breath caught. Dr. Kim's voice was steady now, as if she'd crossed into a place where fear became routine. "We have a contract," she said, "with the county. Overflows, special cases, unclaimed remains, things that need to stay cold until paperwork catches up." Noah shook his head, dizzy. "In a pharmacy freezer?" Roland's mouth tightened. "Not officially," he said, "but we were the only place with the equipment and the discretion." Dr. Kim held the container, her hands trembling slightly. "Most of the time it's just storage," she said. "A sealed container, a drawer, a lock. No one asks questions. We get a check, we look away." Noah swallowed, voice barely audible. "And this one?" Dr. Kim's gaze flicked to the container lid. "This one came back," she said. Roland nodded slowly. "Twice now," he murmured. "Same pattern." Noah felt his stomach twist. "Came back from where?" Dr. Kim hesitated. Roland answered instead, voice low. "From the morgue," he said. "From the crematory, from the ground. It doesn't matter. It doesn't stay." The tapping inside the container grew faster. Noah backed away, heart hammering. "This is insane." Dr. Kim's eyes met his. "It's not insane," she said quietly. "It's just inconvenient." Noah stared at her, horrified. Roland stepped closer, his voice calm like someone explaining a procedure. "We keep it cold," he said. "We keep the lid on. We don't open it. We don't look. And when it's quiet again, we pretend it never happened." Noah's throat tightened. "And if it isn't quiet?" Dr. Kim's face hardened. "Then we move it," she said. Roland nodded. "We take it to the drop," he said. "We put it where it wants to go." Noah felt his skin go cold. "What does it want?" The tapping stopped. The back room fell silent. For a moment, even the freezer hum seemed to hold still. Then the container lid shifted, visibly under Dr. Kim's hands. A slow twist, as if something inside had grabbed the lid and turned it. Noah's breath caught. He stepped back. Dr. Kim's grip tightened. "No," she whispered. Roland reached into his pocket and pulled out a strip of heavy-duty tape. He began wrapping it around the container, sealing the lid in quick, practiced motions. The lid kept shifting beneath the tape, pushing against it like a mouth trying to open. Noah watched, frozen, as Roland's hands moved with mechanical calm. Dr. Kim's face was pale, sweat on her forehead. The tape held. The lid stopped moving. Roland stepped back, breathing hard. "Okay," he said softly. "Okay." Dr. Kim swallowed, eyes closed briefly. Then she looked at Noah. "You didn't see this," she said. Noah shook his head slowly. "I did." Roland's voice was quiet. "Then you'll understand why we don't talk about it." Dr. Kim slid the container back into the bottom drawer and slammed it shut, harder than necessary. She closed the freezer. She locked it. Then she leaned against it, eyes closed, as if keeping something in with her own body. Noah stood shaking. The store reopened 10 minutes later. Customers drifted in again, unaware of anything beneath their feet. Noah went back to facing shelves, his hands moving automatically, his mind elsewhere. He kept thinking about the phrase, patient return, about something that had been stored cold and quiet, and yet somehow still wanted. At the end of the shift, Dr. Kim pulled Noah aside. Her voice was gentle now, tired. "If you want to quit," she said, "I'll understand." Noah swallowed. He thought about rent, about his sobriety, about needing structure. He shook his head. "I need the job," he whispered. Dr. Kim nodded as if she'd expected that. "Then don't be curious," she said softly. "Curiosity is like heat. It wakes things up." Noah went home that morning and slept fitfully. That night he returned. He did his job. He avoided the back room. He tried not to think. At 3:18 a.m., the freezer beeped once. Just once. Noah froze. It didn't beep again. But a minute later, the store's automatic doors slid open with a soft whoosh. A cold gust swept in from the parking lot, and standing just inside the entrance, framed by fluorescent light, was a figure. A person in a white, sheet-like garment, edges stiff with frost, face obscured in shadow. It stood still, patient, as if waiting to be helped. Noah's mouth went dry. The figure turned its head slightly toward the back room, and Noah, with a sick certainty, understood the sequence. The freezer wasn't just storing something, it was keeping a door shut, and every beep was that door loosening. Noah forced his legs to move. He walked toward the entrance slowly, keeping his voice calm, like he was dealing with any late-night customer. "Sir," he said softly, "we're open. Can I help you find something?" The figure didn't respond. It simply lifted a hand, pale, stiff, and pointed toward the back, toward the freezer. Noah's breath caught. The figure's mouth, hidden in shadow, whispered a single phrase in a voice like cold air. "Returned," it said. Then it stepped forward. Noah stumbled back, heart pounding, and called out for Roland. Roland appeared, eyes widening as he saw the figure. He moved quickly, pushing past Noah. Roland didn't speak. He simply grabbed a blanket from the emergency kit at the front desk and threw it over the figure's head like a hood. The figure went still. Roland guided it, firm but gentle, toward the back, as if escorting a drunk customer out of the store. Noah followed, shaking. They reached the back room. Roland opened the freezer drawer. The taped container sat there, silent. Roland lifted the blanket off the figure. The back room lights flickered, dimming. Noah's stomach twisted. Under the blanket was not a person. It was a shape, roughly human-sized, made of frost and stiff fabric and something darker beneath. No face, no eyes, just a hollow opening where a mouth should be, rimmed with ice. The shape leaned toward the freezer drawer, and the container began tapping again, frantic. Roland's voice was calm, almost soothing. "Not tonight," he whispered. "Not yet." The shape paused. Then it turned slightly toward Noah, as if noticing him for the first time. Noah held his breath, lungs burning. The shape leaned closer, the cold radiating off it. And in that hollow opening, a voice whispered softly. "You're warm," it said. Noah's vision blurred. He stumbled backward. Roland shoved the blanket back over the shape and pushed it out of the room, slamming the door behind them. The freezer hum returned to normal. The tapping stopped. Noah stood shaking in the back room, hand pressed to his mouth, breathing shallowly. Dr. Kim appeared in the doorway, her face drained. "I told you," she whispered. "Curiosity is heat." Noah's voice was barely there. "What happens if it gets out?" Dr. Kim stared at him, eyes tired. "Then it keeps returning. she said softly. And it doesn't stop at the freezer. Noah quit the next morning. He didn't give notice. He didn't explain. He packed his locker, left his badge on the desk, and walked out into the bright Arizona sun, feeling like he'd escaped a cold place that had been waiting to swallow him. But in the months afterward, sometimes, in the middle of the night, his apartment refrigerator would beep once, just once. And when Noah held his breath and waited, he'd hear a faint tapping from inside. 3 taps, 2 taps, 3 taps, like something practicing its way back. Story 6. Maya Ellison started volunteering at the hospice because she needed to feel useful again. Her father had died in spring, and grief had made her life feel blurry, like she was walking through water. People told her to take time, to be gentle with herself, to let the sadness pass. But grief didn't pass. It settled. Maya was 34, a librarian by trade, someone who spent her days cataloging information and guiding people through the quiet, orderly world of books. In that world, things had labels and locations. Even loss could be shelved in a way. But after her father's death, nothing felt organized. So she signed up at a small hospice facility on the edge of town, a calm place with soft lighting, warm blankets, and a garden that smelled of rosemary and wet soil. Her job as a volunteer was simple. Sit with patients who didn't have family present, read to them if they wanted, hold their hand, offer quiet companionship. On her first day, the volunteer coordinator, a gentle woman named Clara, gave her the usual warnings. Some patients are confused. Some can be angry. Some talk about things you can't fix. And then Clara added something else. In room 9, she said softly, we don't read. Maya blinked. We don't read? Clara nodded. We can sit, we can hold a hand, we can listen, but we don't read aloud in room 9, not even if he asks. Maya felt a flicker of irritation. Hospice was full of rules, but this one seemed childish, superstitious. Why? She asked. Clara's smile faded a fraction. Because, she said quietly. He repeats. Maya didn't understand, but she nodded anyway. The facility was small, a single hall with 12 rooms, each with a bed, a chair, and a window looking out on the garden. The air smelled faintly of lavender and disinfectant. Maya was assigned to room 6 that afternoon, an elderly woman named Eleanor, who slept most of the time. Maya sat in the chair and listened to the patient's breathing, slow and shallow, like a tide coming in and out. When Eleanor stirred, Maya offered water, adjusted the blanket, and spoke softly about the garden outside. Eleanor smiled faintly and drifted back to sleep. It was peaceful. Maya left feeling, for the first time in weeks, that her chest wasn't completely full of stones. She returned 3 days later, and the next week, and then regularly, fitting the volunteer hours around her library work. She grew used to the hospice's gentle rhythms, staff moving quietly, soft voices, the steady beep of machines behind closed doors, and always room 9 with its door closed. Sometimes Maya saw staff go in and out of room 9, their faces calm but slightly tense. Sometimes she saw Clara stop outside the door and simply stand there for a moment, as if listening, then move on. Maya tried not to be curious, but curiosity is a kind of hunger too, and hers had always been fed by questions. One rainy evening, Maya arrived for a late volunteer shift. The facility needed extra help because a storm had kept some staff from coming in. Clara greeted her at the desk, eyes tired. "Thank you," she said softly. "We're short tonight." Maya nodded. "Where do you need me?" Clara hesitated. "Room 9, she said. Maya's stomach tightened. "You said—" "I know," Clara said quietly. "But his family didn't come, and he's been restless. Just sit with him. Don't read." Maya nodded, uneasy. Clara handed her a small basket with tissues and a cup of water. "If he asks you to read," she said, "tell him your voice is tired." Maya forced a small smile. "Okay." She walked down the hall. The lights were dimmer than usual, storm-gray light filtering through windows. Rain tapped softly against the glass. Room 9's door was slightly open. Maya paused, taking a breath, then knocked gently. A voice from inside said, "Come in." The voice was calm, not frail. A man's voice, low and steady. Maya stepped inside. The room was cooler than the others. The blinds were half closed, the light thin. The patient, Mr. Hollis, lay propped on pillows, his face thin but alert, eyes bright. He looked younger than Maya expected, maybe 60, maybe even late 50s. His hair was gray at the temples, but his gaze was sharp. He watched her with the patient attention of someone who had been waiting a long time. "Hello," Maya said softly. "I'm Maya. I'm a volunteer." Mr. Hollis smiled faintly. "A librarian," he said. Maya blinked. "How did you know?" He gestured toward her hands. "You hold your fingers like you're used to turning pages," he said, "and you look at the room like you're cataloging it." Maya felt a chill. "Yes," she admitted. "I am." Mr. Hollis nodded as if satisfied. "Good," he said. "Then you understand the importance of words." Maya sat in the chair beside the bed. "How are you feeling?" Mr. Hollis's eyes remained on hers. "Like I'm almost done," he said without sadness. "But not quite." Maya swallowed. "Is there anything you need?" Mr. Hollis's smile widened slightly. "Read to me," he said. Maya's chest tightened. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "My voice is tired tonight." Mr. Hollis studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded, as if he'd expected the answer. "Then talk," he said. "Tell me something you've read recently." Maya exhaled. Talking was fine. It wasn't reading aloud. She told him about a novel she'd been shelving at the library, a quiet story about a woman returning to her hometown. She kept her voice calm, gentle, letting the words flow like rain. Mr. Hollis listened, eyes half closed. At first, everything felt normal. Then, as Maya spoke, Mr. Hollis began to whisper along, not repeating her words exactly, but speaking in tandem, a half beat behind, like an echo that didn't match the original. Maya faltered. "Are you—" "Keep going," Mr. Hollis whispered. "Don't stop." Maya's throat tightened, but she continued, voice softer. Mr. Hollis's whisper grew clearer. He was repeating her words now, exactly, word for word. Maya's skin prickled. She stopped speaking. Mr. Hollis's whisper continued anyway, finishing the sentence she'd started in her voice. Not his, hers. Maya froze. The sound came from his mouth, but it was unmistakably her tone, her cadence. She stared at him, heart pounding. Mr. Hollis opened his eyes and smiled gently. "You hear it?" he said, in his own voice again. "Good." Maya's mouth was dry. "What is that?" Mr. Hollis's gaze drifted toward the window, rain streaking the glass. "It's what happens when you spend your life taking people's words," he said softly. "When you borrow them, repeat them, make them yours." Maya swallowed. "I'm just talking." Mr. Hollis nodded. "You think so?" he whispered. He closed his eyes again. "Read to me," he said. Maya shook her head, throat tight. "No." Mr. Hollis opened his eyes. "Then I'll read," he said. Maya stared. "You don't have a book." Mr. Hollis smiled and lifted his hand slightly, pointing toward the bedside table. Maya looked. There was a book there now, a hardcover, plain blue, no title. It hadn't been there when she walked in. She was sure of it. Her breath caught. Mr. Hollis's voice was calm. "Open it," he said. Maya's hands trembled. "I'm not—" "Open it," he repeated, patient. Maya stood slowly, as if in a dream, and reached for the book. Her fingers touched the cover. It was cold. Not cool like a book left near a window, but cold like something pulled from a freezer. She lifted it, opened it. The pages inside were blank. Maya stared, confused. Mr. Hollis's voice whispered, gentle. "Read." Maya's throat tightened. "There's nothing." Mr. Hollis smiled faintly. "Read anyway," he said. Maya shook her head, backing away with the book in her hands. Mr. Hollis's eyes remained on her, patient, waiting. Then he began to speak, low and steady. He spoke words that weren't in the blank book, but as he spoke, letters appeared on the pages, ink spreading like veins, lines forming in neat, printed text. Maya stared, horrified, as the blank pages filled themselves with a story. Not the novel she'd described, a different story, a familiar story. It was about a girl sitting beside a hospice bed, holding a book, reading words she didn't want to read. It described her clothing, her breath, the rain outside. It described her fear. Maya's stomach twisted. The story on the page moved forward as Mr. Hollis spoke, writing itself in real time, like dictation. The words were calm, intimate, unhurried. The story said that Maya would keep reading, that she wouldn't be able to stop once she started, that her voice would carry the words into the room, and the room would remember them. Maya's hands shook. She slammed the book shut. Mr. Hollis stopped speaking. The room fell quiet except for rain. Maya's breathing was loud in her ears. Mr. Hollis watched her gently, as if patient with her confusion. "You don't have to be afraid," he said softly. "It's simple. I repeat because I'm being practiced." Maya stared. Practiced for what? Mr. Hollis's smile widened slightly, and for the first time, Maya saw something behind it that made her skin crawl. Hunger. "Practiced for leaving," he whispered, "for wearing voices that aren't mine, for walking out of here with words on my tongue that open doors." Maya backed toward the door, clutching the book. Mr. Hollis's voice stayed calm. "Clara told you not to read," he said, "because if you read, you give me more." Maya's throat tight. "More what?" Mr. Hollis's gaze flicked to her mouth. "More of you," he whispered. Maya's heart hammered. She turned the doorknob and yanked the door open. In the hallway, Clara stood, not surprised, just tired. Clara's eyes flicked to the book in Maya's hands. "You touched it," Clara whispered. Maya's voice shook. He made it appear." Clara nodded slowly. "He always does," she said. "That's why we don't read in there. He takes the words and he wears them." Maya's breath caught. "What is he?" Clara swallowed. "He's a patient who didn't like being quiet," she whispered. "He was a voice actor, radio, audiobooks. He recorded hundreds of books. He loved being other people. When he came here, he kept asking us to read. He kept begging. And the first nurse who did..." Clara's voice faltered. Maya's hands shook around the book. "What happened?" Clara's eyes were wet. "She went home," Clara whispered, and she couldn't stop reading. Even when she tried to speak normally, it came out in other people's words, like she was being used as a mouth. Maya's throat tightened, panic rising. And then, Clara continued softly, she came back here in the night, stood outside room 9, and asked to be let in. She said she needed to return what she'd borrowed. Maya's skin went cold. Return what? Clara looked toward room 9's door. Her voice was barely audible. Her voice, she whispered. Behind them, room 9's door opened wider. Mr. Hollis stood in the doorway now, hospital gown hanging from his thin frame, his eyes bright. He smiled at Maya. "Maya," he said in her voice. Maya's knees nearly buckled. Clara grabbed her arm. "Don't answer him," she hissed. Maya clenched her jaw, holding her breath. Mr. Hollis stepped into the hallway. The air around him felt colder, like the room carried its own temperature. He looked at Clara, then back at Maya. His mouth moved, and Maya heard her own voice speak again, calm and intimate. "Read," it said. Maya's throat burned. She shook her head slightly. Mr. Hollis's smile remained patient. He lifted his hand and pointed toward the book in Maya's grip. The book began to vibrate softly, like something alive. Maya wanted to throw it, to drop it, to run, but her fingers tightened around it instead. She felt, with sudden horror, that she didn't want to let go, because the book felt like purpose, like meaning, like something that could fill the hollow space grief had left behind. Mr. Hollis stepped closer. Clara's grip tightened. "Maya," she whispered urgently, "you need to put it back in his room. You need to close the door. Don't give him more." Maya's breath shook. She nodded barely. She walked toward room 9 slowly, like someone approaching a sleeping animal. Mr. Hollis watched her, smiling. As she reached the doorway, she held the book out. Mr. Hollis's eyes fixed on it. His lips parted, and Maya felt an invisible pull, like a string attached to her throat. Her voice rose in her chest without permission. Words began to form, not in her mind, but in her mouth. The first sentence of the story in the blank book. Maya's lips moved. Clara's voice hissed, "No," but the words came out anyway. Maya heard herself reading aloud, calm and clear. Mr. Hollis's smile widened, satisfied. Ink seeped from beneath the book's cover, staining Maya's fingers like spilled pen. And suddenly, Maya understood. He wasn't just repeating. He was copying. He was taking voices one by one, layering them inside himself, practicing until he could speak like anyone, until he could walk out wearing whatever voice opened the right door. Maya tried to stop, but her mouth kept moving. The words flowed unhurried, intimate, describing her fear as it happened. Mr. Hollis leaned closer, listening to her voice like it was music. Clara grabbed Maya's shoulders and shook her gently. Maya's eyes filled with tears. Her mouth kept reading. Mr. Hollis's hand lifted toward Maya's throat, fingers hovering inches away. The air felt icy. Clara reached into her pocket and pulled out a small spray bottle. Saline, something harmless, and sprayed it into Mr. Hollis's face. He flinched, startled, stepping back. The pull on Maya's throat loosened. Maya gasped, cutting off the words mid-sentence. The hallway fell silent. Mr. Hollis stared at Clara, his expression calm again, almost amused. "That won't stop it," he said in Maya's voice. "She's already started." Clara's face went pale. Maya clutched her throat, breathing hard. Her voice felt strange, too light, like it wasn't anchored properly. Clara whispered, "Maya, go home. Don't talk. Don't read. Don't even think in sentences." Maya nodded, panic rising. She turned and ran down the hallway, out of the hospice, into the storm. Rain hit her face like cold hands. She drove home, shaking, silent, holding her breath whenever she could. In her apartment, she locked the door, drew the curtains, and sat on the floor with her back against the wall. She didn't speak. She didn't turn on the television. She didn't open a book. She just listened to the rain and tried not to think. At 2:13 a.m., her phone lit up with a message. No sender, just blank. Then another message appeared, typing itself slowly. Read. Maya stared, throat tight. She threw the phone across the room. It clattered and went dark. In the silence, she heard something else. A faint whisper from her own mouth, not formed by her will. A single word, soft and calm, in someone else's voice. Read. Maya pressed both hands to her lips, eyes wide with terror. And in that moment, she realized what Clara had meant. She'd already started. And somewhere down the hall of the hospice, in room 9, a man who wasn't content to die quietly lay smiling in the dim light, practicing Maya's voice, patient as rain, waiting for the next volunteer who needed to feel useful. Story 7. Caleb Rhodes was hired as the new night nurse at Cedar Ridge Youth Center because his resume looked clean, and the director was desperate. Cedar Ridge sat in a wooded corner of northern New England, a residential facility for teens with behavioral issues, trauma histories, and nowhere else to go. The brochures called it therapeutic. The website showed smiling counselors and hiking trails and sunlight through pine trees. But the building itself was old, a converted boarding school with thick stone walls and narrow hallways that smelled like disinfectant and wet leaves. Caleb was 36, a nurse with 10 years of emergency room experience, and he thought he'd seen most forms of human suffering. He had learned to stay calm in chaos, to speak gently to people who screamed, to keep his hands steady. He took the job because the hours were good and because he needed a quieter pace after a burnout that had left him shaky in the ER. Night shifts at Cedar Ridge were supposed to be simple. Medication checks, monitoring, paperwork, making sure no one hurt themselves. On his first night, the director, Ms. Avery, walked him through the building. She spoke in a calm, practiced tone, as if she'd recited the tour 100 times. Dorm rooms on the second floor, common room, nursing station, security office. Then she stopped at the bottom of a stairwell that led down beneath the building. There was a door there, metal, painted gray, with a keypad lock and a sign that read, Archive, Staff, Only. Ms. Avery turned to Caleb. "We don't go down there," she said. Caleb blinked. "Archive?" Ms. Avery nodded. "Old records, files, not important for your job." Caleb's instincts pricked. "If it's not important, why lock it?" Ms. Avery's expression tightened slightly. "Because teenagers get curious," she said, "and some of the files aren't appropriate." Caleb nodded slowly. Ms. Avery handed him a key card and a small notebook. "This is for incident notes," she said. "If anything unusual happens, you write it down. Specific times, specific behaviors." Caleb flipped through the notebook. The first pages were already filled. Not in his handwriting. Dates, times, short, clipped notes. 2:47 a.m. Hearing reported in East Hall. Resident claims whispering from vents. 3:12 a.m. Lights flicker. Door to archive stairwell found ajar. Secured. 1:05 a.m. Resident refused meds. Stated, "They are writing me." Caleb looked up. "Who wrote this?" Ms. Avery's voice was neutral. "Previous staff," she said. Caleb studied her. "And they quit?" Ms. Avery smiled faintly. "They moved on," she said. Caleb had learned that moved on meant left quickly. He didn't push. His first few nights were quiet. The teens slept. Some woke and paced. Some cried softly into pillows. Caleb administered meds, made notes, offered water, used his calm ER voice to talk people down from anxiety. He tried to ignore the archive door at the bottom of the stairwell, but he noticed patterns. The facility was quietest between midnight and 2:30. After that, something shifted. Not dramatic, not like alarms or screaming, just a subtle tension, a sense that the building's air grew heavier, as if it filled with unseen attention. At 2:47 on his fourth night, the first teen came to the nursing station. Her name was Lila, 16, thin, with a shaved undercut, and eyes that looked older than her age. She stood in the doorway, holding her blanket around her shoulders like armor. Caleb smiled gently. "Can't sleep?" Lila shook her head. Her voice was low. "They're writing again." Caleb kept his tone calm. "Who's writing?" Lila's eyes flicked toward the stairwell. "Down there," she whispered. "They keep writing my name." Caleb swallowed. "In the archive?" Lila nodded. "It's like my skin itches when they do it," she said, voice shaky. "Like a pen scratching inside my bones." Caleb's stomach tightened. "Have you told your counselor?" Lila's laugh was soft and bitter. "They tell me it's trauma," she said. "They tell me I'm making stories." She stepped closer, eyes wide. "But I can hear it, scratching, like paper." Caleb nodded slowly, making a note in his incident book. 2:47. Lila reports writing sensation, scratching sound. Lila watched him write. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Don't," she whispered. Caleb paused. "Don't what?" "Don't write it down," she said urgently. "They like it when you write it down. It makes it real." Caleb felt a chill. He closed the notebook slowly. "Okay," he said softly. "How about we sit in the common room for a while?" Lila nodded, still tense. They sat in the common room, dimly lit, rain tapping the windows. The facility was surrounded by trees that moved slowly in the wind, making shadows shift. Lila hugged her blanket. Caleb spoke gently about small things, music, favorite foods, the garden in summer. Lila's breathing slowed. At 3:12, the lights flickered. Once, twice, then steady again. Lila's eyes went wide. "They're opening it?" she whispered. Caleb frowned. "Opening what?" Lila pointed toward the stairwell. Caleb listened. At first he heard nothing. Then faintly a soft click, a keypad beep, and the slow creak of a door opening. Caleb stood, heart pounding, and walked toward the stairwell. The archive door at the bottom of the stairs was open. Just a crack. Cold air drifted up, smelling faintly of paper and dust. Caleb stared at the open door. No one else was on shift besides the security guard, who was stationed at the front. No staff should have been down there. Caleb descended the stairs cautiously. At the bottom, he stood before the cracked door. He could see darkness beyond, and a faint glow, like a lamp left on. Caleb's hand hovered near the door. He told himself he was a nurse, not a security guard. He wasn't supposed to investigate, but something about the open door felt like neglect, like an injury you couldn't ignore. He pushed it open slightly wider. The archive room beyond was not what he expected. It was larger than the building should allow. A long room with shelves of file boxes, cabinets, and stacks of old paper. A single desk lamp glowed at the far end, and at that desk sat a teenager. A boy, maybe 15, hunched over paper, writing. Caleb's breath caught. The boy looked up slowly, eyes dull and patient. He wore Cedar Ridge sweatpants and a hoodie, but Caleb didn't recognize him from the roster. The boy's hand kept writing even as he looked up. Caleb whispered, "Hey, you shouldn't be down here." The boy smiled faintly. "You're late," he said. Caleb swallowed. "Who are you?" The boy's gaze was steady, as if he'd been waiting for this question. "I'm the one who stays," he said softly. Caleb's heart hammered. "What are you doing?" The boy looked down at the paper again. The pen scratched steadily. "Making sure," he whispered. "Making sure you all stay in the story." Caleb stepped closer despite himself. The paper on the desk was filled with names, teen names, dates, short notes written in neat handwriting, refused meds, contained after incident, high risk, move to lower level. Caleb's stomach twisted. It looked like patient documentation, but different, more personal, more intimate. On the top line, written larger than the others, was a name. Lila Hart. Caleb's breath caught. The boy looked up again, smiling. "She's loud," he said softly, "but she'll learn." Caleb's voice trembled. "Stop." The boy tilted his head, listening. Then he said, almost gently, "You can't stop what's already been written." Caleb grabbed the paper off the desk. The boy's hand kept writing, pen moving across the desk's surface as if paper still existed. Caleb stared, horrified. The pen scratched on wood, leaving faint grooves, letters forming in the desk itself. Caleb's throat tightened. He backed away, clutching the paper. The boy's eyes followed him, patient. "Bring it back," he whispered. "It's mine." Caleb turned and ran up the stairs. He slammed the archive door behind him and punched in the code Ms. Avery had given him, locking it. His hands shook. He looked at the paper in his grip. It wasn't paper anymore. It was a thin sheet of something that looked like skin, translucent and pale, with ink bleeding into it. Caleb's stomach heaved. He dropped it. The sheet fluttered to the floor like a dead leaf. Lila stood at the top of the stairs, eyes wide. "I told you," she whispered. "Don't write it down." Caleb's voice was hoarse. "What is down there?" Lila's gaze flicked toward the locked door. "A room that keeps us," she whispered. "A room that decides who we are." Caleb's mind raced. He went to find Ms. Avery immediately, pounding on her office door. She answered, hair pinned up, eyes tired, as if she hadn't been sleeping either. "What?" she snapped. Caleb's voice shook. The archive door opened. "There's a kid down there. He's writing names. It's..." Ms. Avery's face went still. Then, slowly, she closed her office door. Her voice dropped low. "You went down there?" Caleb swallowed. "Yes." Ms. Avery stared at him for a long moment, then exhaled. "Then you've seen it," she said quietly. Caleb's throat tight. "What is it?" Ms. Avery's expression was something like resignation. "It's the old program," she whispered. "Before Cedar Ridge was called therapeutic, when it was corrective." Caleb stared, confused. Ms. Avery continued, voice careful. "This building used to be a reform school, decades ago. Kids sent here because they were inconvenient, too loud, too strange, too disobedient." Caleb's stomach twisted. "They kept files," she said. "They documented everything. They wrote children into categories until the categories were all that mattered." Caleb whispered, "And now?" Miss Avery looked at him with tired eyes. "Now the writing doesn't stop," she said. "The archive keeps doing what it was built to do. It records. It defines. And when a kid is written a certain way for long enough, She swallowed. They become it. Caleb's skin went cold. He thought of Lila saying her bones itched like pen scratches. He thought of the boy in the archive, patient, writing in wood. Caleb's voice shook. We need to call someone. Ms. Avery's laugh was soft and bitter. We tried, she said. Investigations came, inspectors, lawsuits, and every time the archive doctor stayed locked. The room looked like old storage. The files were just paper. She leaned closer, voice barely audible. But the writing waits, she whispered. It waits until night, until the building is quiet, until someone reads and believes. Caleb's chest tightened. So what do we do? Ms. Avery's eyes drifted toward the stairwell. We keep the door locked, she said softly. We don't go down. We don't read the names. We don't write extra notes. We try not to give it more ink. Caleb's hands shook. Tonight, Ms. Avery said, you'll hear scratching again. You'll want to check. Don't. Caleb whispered. And the kids? Ms. Avery's face softened slightly. We help them as much as we can, she said. But we're still in the story. And the story was written long ago by people who believed kids could be fixed by being defined. Caleb left her office feeling sick. He returned to the nursing station and tried to act normal. Lila sat in the common room, eyes on the stairwell, blanket wrapped tight. At 2:47, the scratching began. Faint, steady, like a pen on paper beneath the floor. Caleb held his breath. The lights flickered once. Lila whispered, "It's writing someone new." Caleb's chest tightened. He opened the incident notebook, then stopped. He remembered what Lila had said. They like it when you write it down. Caleb closed the notebook. He sat with his hands in his lap, forcing himself to do nothing. The scratching grew louder, as if irritated. A faint beep came from the archive keypad, then silence. Caleb exhaled shakily. At 3:18, a scream erupted from the second-floor dorms. Caleb shot up and ran, heart pounding. He found a boy named Mason standing in the hallway, eyes wild. "They wrote me," Mason sobbed. "They wrote me to the room. They wrote me to the lower level." Caleb's throat tight. "What do you mean?" Mason's hands shook. He held up his forearm. On his skin, faint red lines appeared, not scratches from nails. Words, letters pressed into skin as if written from the inside. "Move to lower level." Caleb's stomach turned. He remembered the note on the desk in the archive. High risk. Move to lower level. The archive wasn't just recording. It was issuing orders. Caleb grabbed Mason gently. "Listen to me," he said, voice steady. "Stay with me. Don't go near the stairs." Mason sobbed, nodding desperately. Caleb guided him back toward the nursing station, toward light, toward safety. But as they approached the stairwell, the archive door unlocked by itself with a soft beep. The gray metal door swung open slowly. Cold air spilled out, smelling of paper and damp stone. The boy from the archive stood in the doorway now, pen in hand. He looked at Mason with patient calm. "It's time," he said softly. Mason screamed, trying to pull away, but his feet moved toward the door as if pulled by strings. Caleb grabbed him, holding tight. Mason sobbed, fighting, but his body strained toward the open doorway. The archive boy's eyes moved to Caleb. His smile widened slightly. "Ah," he whispered. "A helper." Caleb's throat tight. "No," he said, voice shaking. "You don't take him." The archive boy tilted his head. Then he lifted the pen and wrote in the air. Caleb couldn't see the words form, but he felt them. A tightening in his chest. A pressure behind his eyes. He heard, faintly, the scratching sound of a pen moving over paper, and suddenly Caleb's mouth opened, words spilling out in a voice that wasn't his. "Release subject," he heard himself say, calm and clinical. "Transfer indicated." Caleb's eyes widened in horror. His own voice had turned into a bureaucratic note. His hands loosened. Mason stumbled forward, crying. Caleb tried to grab him again, but his arms felt heavy, as if filled with ink. The archive boy smiled, satisfied. "Good," he whispered. "Now you're part of the documentation." Mason crossed the threshold into the archive. The door began to close behind him. Caleb lunged forward, desperate, but the air thickened like glue. His lungs burned, his body slowed. The archive door shut gently. The keypad beeped. Locked. Silence returned. Caleb stood in the stairwell, shaking, tears in his eyes, feeling like he'd watched someone disappear into a file cabinet. Behind him, Lila whispered from the hallway, voice hollow. "That's what it does," she said. "It writes and writes until we become the words." Caleb quit the next day. He filed reports. He called state agencies. He begged. Investigators came. They toured the building in daylight. The archive door stayed locked. The room below appeared on inspection to be nothing but old storage and paper records. No boy at a desk. No pen scratching. No cold air. Mason's file was updated to show he'd been transferred out of facility for medical treatment. His bed was empty. His name stopped being spoken. Caleb moved to a different city and took a job in a hospital again, surrounded by machines and numbers he could trust. But sometimes, in the quiet of night shift, when he wrote a patient's notes in the electronic chart, he would feel a faint itch in his bones, like a pen scratching from the inside. And when he looked down at his own forearm, under the harsh hospital light, he would sometimes swear he could see faint letters on his skin. Release subject, transfer indicated. As if someone, somewhere, had written him into a story, too, and was still keeping track. Story 8. Sophie Calder didn't come back to her childhood town for closure. She came back because her aunt's voicemail had sounded tired, and because the message included a word Sophie hadn't heard in years. Schoolhouse. Not the elementary school Sophie attended, not the modern campus with bright murals and new windows. The old one. The brick building on the hill that the town kept boarded up and pretended was waiting for renovations that never came. The building kids dared each other to approach on Halloween. The place, adults described with a shrug and a quick change of subject. Sophie was 33 now, living 2 states away, teaching art at a community college. She hadn't been back in over a decade. She told herself she'd outgrown the town, outgrown the way everything felt small and watched. But the voicemail pulled her back anyway. "There's something in there again," her aunt had said, "and it's using your name like it never stopped." Sophie drove in on a gray morning, rain steady but gentle, turning the roads slick and making the evergreens glisten. The town looked the same in the way old places do, familiar shapes softened by time. The diner, the gas station, the small library with peeling paint. Her aunt's house sat at the edge of town, a low ranch with wind chimes that rang in the rain. Aunt Marlene opened the door before Sophie knocked. Marlene looked older than Sophie expected. Her hair was thinner, her posture slightly bent, but her eyes were sharp and anxious. "You came," Marlene said, voice tight. Sophie nodded and hugged her. Marlene smelled like soap and coffee and something faintly metallic, like old keys. Inside, Marlene didn't offer small talk. She led Sophie to the kitchen table and opened a drawer. From it, she pulled a set of keys on a ring, heavy and tarnished. "The town board gave me these," Marlene said, "because I used to be a custodian, because I know the building." Sophie stared. "They gave you keys to the old schoolhouse?" Marlene nodded. "They don't want to go in there, not anymore." Sophie's stomach tightened. Marlene pushed the keys across the table like she was sliding a burden. "I need you to see it," she whispered, "because it won't stop until you do." Sophie swallowed. "See what?" Marlene's eyes flicked toward the rain-streaked window. "The art room," she said. "The chalkboard, the writing." Sophie felt a cold sensation crawl up her arms. When Sophie was 12, she'd been caught after hours in the old schoolhouse, wandering with 2 friends and a flashlight, looking for ghosts. She remembered the smell of damp brick, the echo of her footsteps, the thrill of being somewhere forbidden. She also remembered the chalkboard. Not any specific words, just the sensation of looking at it and feeling like it was looking back. Sophie had stopped thinking about it because she'd had to, because childhood fear, when it isn't validated, turns into shame. Now Marlene was bringing it back like a bruise pressed. They drove up the hill in Marlene's car, rain hissing under the tires. The old schoolhouse loomed through trees, brick darkened with moisture. Boards covered the windows, but some were warped, leaving narrow gaps like half-closed eyes. Marlene parked in the cracked lot. "Stay close," she said. Sophie nodded. The front doors were chained, but Marlene led her around back to a side entrance where the chain hung loose, as if someone had opened it recently, and tried to make it look untouched. Marlene fit the key in the lock. The door opened with a soft, damp sigh. Inside, the air was cold and stale, smelling of wet plaster and old paper. The hallway stretched long, lockers lining both sides, their doors rusted. Fluorescent lights didn't work. Marlene carried a flashlight. Their footsteps echoed, the sound swallowed and returned by the building like a slow breath. Sophie felt her skin prickle with the familiar sensation of being watched. Marlene led her down the hall, past classrooms with broken glass and scattered desks, past the library with books left to rot, past the principal's office where a calendar still hung on the wall, frozen on a month from decades ago. At the end of the corridor was a door marked Art. Marlene stopped there, her hand on the knob. Her knuckles were white. "Before I open it," Marlene whispered, "promise me you won't answer it, no matter what it writes, no matter what it asks." Sophie's throat tightened. "Answer what?" Marlene's eyes were wet. "Promise." Sophie nodded, uneasy. "I promise." Marlene opened the art room door. The air inside was colder, as if the room stored winter in its corners. The flashlight beam swept across tables, dusty jars of brushes, dried paint palettes, paper curled into brittle waves. And then the beam hit the chalkboard. The board filled the far wall, wide and dark. On it, in thick white chalk, were words. Not random scribbles, not graffiti. Lines written carefully, like a lesson plan. Sophie Calder, grade 6, absent today. Sophie's breath caught. Marlene whispered, "It starts with attendance." Beneath the first line were more names. Not Sophie's classmates, not at first. Names Sophie didn't recognize, written in neat columns. Then farther down, names Sophie recognized from town. People she knew now as adults. People who had moved away. People who had died. Names written beside them in a different color chalk. Yellow, faint but visible. Transferred, withdrawn, excused. Sophie stepped closer, heart pounding. The chalk looked fresh, not old, not dusty, as if someone had written it minutes ago. Sophie whispered, "Who's doing this?" Marlene didn't answer. The flashlight beam moved and Sophie saw the bottom of the board. A final line, written larger than the rest. "Please sign in." Below it, drawn in chalk, was a rectangle like a clipboard outline, with a line for a signature. Sophie's throat tightened. Marlene whispered, "Don't." Sophie stared at the chalk signature line. It felt absurd, like a prank. But the room's air hummed faintly, a low vibration that made Sophie's teeth ache. Sophie took a step back. The chalkboard changed, not in a dramatic flash, just another line appeared, slowly, as if written by an invisible hand. "Hello, Sophie." Sophie froze. Marlene's grip tightened on Sophie's arm. "Don't answer it," she hissed. Sophie swallowed hard. The chalkboard wrote again. "It's good you came back. We've been holding your seat." Sophie's heart hammered. The room seemed to tilt slightly, not physically, but in her perception, as if the building had shifted its attention fully onto her. Sophie whispered, This is impossible." Marlene's voice shook. "It's not," she whispered. "It's just patient." The chalkboard wrote again, the letters forming with slow certainty. "Do you remember what you left here?" Sophie's mind flashed to childhood, the night she'd come with friends, the dare, the laughter, the way fear turned her stomach cold. She remembered one more thing now. She remembered a drawing, a self-portrait in charcoal made for an assignment that she'd left on the art room shelf because she was embarrassed by how sad it looked. She remembered coming back for it the next day and finding it gone. Sophie's hands trembled. The chalkboard wrote again. "We kept it." Sophie backed away from the board. Marlene tugged her toward the door. "We have to go." Sophie nodded, breath shaking. But as they turned, Sophie's flashlight beam swept across the room's corner, and she saw a filing cabinet. Metal, old, dented. Its top drawer was slightly open. Inside it, Sophie saw stacks of paper, neatly filed. Art assignments, names on tabs. Sophie felt an irresistible pull. The librarian part of her brain, order, labels, evidence, wanted to look. Marlene whispered urgently, "Don't?" Sophie stepped toward the cabinet anyway, like sleepwalking. She opened the drawer fully. Inside were folders, each one labeled in thick black marker, each one a student name. Sophie's stomach twisted. At the front was a folder labeled Sophie Calder. Her hands shook as she pulled it out. Inside was her charcoal self-portrait, exactly as she remembered it. The same smudged corners, the same heavy shadows under the eyes, the same expression that made her look older than 12. The paper looked unchanged, preserved, and tucked behind it was another sheet, a blank attendance slip with her name printed at the top, a line for her signature. Marlene grabbed Sophie's wrist. "Put it back," she whispered. Sophie's breath caught. "It kept it," she whispered, "all these years." Marlene's voice was strained. "It keeps everything," she said. "That's the problem." The chalkboard wrote again, faster now. "Sign in, Sophie. We can mark you present. We can keep you safe." Sophie's throat tightened. Safe from what? Marlene shook her head. "Don't talk," she whispered. The chalkboard wrote again. "Safe from leaving." Sophie felt cold wash through her. She understood suddenly what this was. A room that kept attendance. A building that kept people listed, filed, preserved. A place that didn't like absences. Sophie's gaze drifted to the art room door. Behind it, the hallway stretched long and dark. and Sophie felt for a moment that the building had already closed around them like a book. Marlene pulled Sophie back toward the door. They stepped into the hallway. The art room door closed behind them with a soft click, gentle and final. Sophie's heart hammered. They hurried down the hallway, flashlights bobbing, footsteps echoing. As they passed the main corridor, Sophie heard something else, a faint scratching sound. Not chalk this time, like paper being shuffled, like filing cabinets opening and closing in slow, patient motions. Marlene's voice was breathless. "It's waking up," she whispered. Sophie's throat tight. "Why me?" Marlene's eyes flicked to Sophie. "Because you were one of the few who left without signing out," she whispered. "You walked away and never completed it. You never closed the story. It's been waiting." They reached the side exit. The door that had opened easily now resisted, as if the lock had tightened. Marlene fumbled with keys, hands shaking. Behind them, footsteps echoed in the hall. Slow, measured, not hurried, as if someone was walking with certainty, knowing they'd catch up eventually. Sophie turned, flashlight beam sweeping. At the far end of the hallway, standing in shadow, was a figure, a child-sized shape. It stood still, head tilted. As Sophie's flashlight hit it, she saw it wasn't one child. It was a stack of drawings. Paper folded into a rough human form, layers of student art pressed together, taped and stapled, forming limbs, a torso, a head. The face was a collage of self-portraits, eyes and mouths overlapping. It took one step forward. Paper rustled softly. Sophie's stomach turned. Marlene whispered, "Don't look at it too long." The paper figure stepped again. Its mouth, made of torn paper lips, opened. A voice came out, layered and soft, like dozens of kids whispering in unison. "Sign in," it said. Sophie's chest tightened. Marlene finally unlocked the door. It swung open, rain air rushing in, smelling of wet earth and freedom. Marlene shoved Sophie through. They ran into the rain, down the hill, toward the car. Behind them, the schoolhouse door closed gently. No slam, no chase. Just a patient closing, as if the building knew time would bring Sophie back. They drove away, wipers sweeping, breath shaking. Sophie stared out at the trees, heart pounding. Marlene's voice was quiet, exhausted. "It'll follow you," she whispered. "Not with feet, with paper, with records, with names. It will show up in small ways." Sophie swallowed. "How do you know?" Marlene's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Because it followed your uncle," she whispered, "and my friend Helen, and the boy who moved away in 9th grade and came back for a reunion and never left again." Sophie's mouth went dry. They reached Marlene's house. Inside, Marlene made tea with shaking hands. Sophie sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. Marlene opened a drawer and pulled out a stack of papers, attendance slips, sign-out forms, old-school documents, some clean, some stained, all with signatures. "All of these," Marlene whispered, "are people who came back and signed in." Sophie stared. "And then what?" Marlene's eyes were wet. "Then they started showing up in town again," she whispered, "but not as themselves, as records, as names in files, as stories people told." Sophie's breath shook. That night, Sophie slept fitfully in the guest room. Rain tapped the roof. At 2:47 a.m., she woke to a soft scratching sound. Not in the walls, on the door, like chalk. Sophie held her breath and stared. The scratching continued, slow and patient, then stopped. A soft whisper came through the wood, layered and gentle. "Hello, Sophie," it said. Sophie's throat tightened. The voice whispered again, "Please, sign in." In the morning, Sophie opened the guest room door. On the hallway wall, written in white chalk, was a neat line. Sophie called her. "Present?" Beneath it, a blank line waited. Sophie stared at it, heart pounding, understanding the true shape of the trap. The schoolhouse didn't need to chase her. It just needed her to eventually answer, to eventually sign. Because once you were marked present, you never became absent again. Story 9. Daniel Mercer took the elevator every day at 6:40 a.m. without thinking about it. It was a routine in a tall apartment building in a mid-sized city, an older place with beige hallways and carpet that always smelled faintly of detergent. Daniel lived on the 12th floor. He worked at a small accounting office downtown. He liked routine. It made life feel manageable. Since his wife left 2 years ago, routine had been the only thing that kept him from feeling like his days were just empty pages. He woke, he showered, he dressed, he made coffee. He took the elevator down. He went to work. He came home. He ate something simple. He watched television. He slept. He didn't ask for more. The elevator in his building was old. The buttons were worn smooth. The mirror inside was slightly cloudy. It made a soft groaning sound when it started moving, like an old person standing up. Daniel had lived here for 5 years and never thought about it much. Then, one Monday in early spring, the elevator stopped on the 7th floor. Daniel wasn't going to the 7th. He was going to the lobby. The doors opened anyway. The hallway outside was empty. The elevator's interior light flickered once. Daniel waited, annoyed, expecting someone to step in. No one did. The doors closed. The elevator continued down. In the lobby, Daniel mentioned it casually to the doorman. The doorman, Mr. Pierce, was an older man with a calm face and tired eyes. He listened, then nodded slowly. "It does that sometimes," Pierce said. "Don't worry about it." Daniel frowned. Why would it stop if no one called it? Pierce's mouth tightened slightly. "Old building," he said. "Old habits." Daniel laughed faintly. "Buildings don't have habits." Pierce didn't laugh back. Daniel went to work and forgot about it. Until it happened again. Wednesday morning, 6:40. Elevator doors closed, began descending, then stopped on the 7th. Doors opened. Empty hallway. But this time, Daniel smelled something. Not garbage, not cleaning chemicals. A faint smell like cold air from a freezer, mixed with something sweet like wilted flowers. Daniel's stomach tightened. He stared at the empty hall. The hallway lights on the 7th floor were dimmer than the others, like someone had lowered them. At the far end of the hall, Daniel saw a door with a wreath. A black wreath. Not the kind you put up for winter holidays. A funeral wreath, dried and brittle. Daniel stared, unsettled. The elevator doors closed. Daniel exhaled shakily and continued down. At work, he couldn't stop thinking about that wreath. He returned home that evening and checked the building directory by the mailboxes. 7th floor, units 701 through 712. Nothing unusual. Daniel told himself it was a neighbor's strange decoration. But the next morning, Thursday, the elevator stopped on the 7th again. This time, the hallway wasn't empty. A woman stood just outside the elevator doors. She was older, maybe in her late 60s, wearing a coat too heavy for spring. Her hair was gray and damp, as if she'd been in the rain. She looked at Daniel with patient attention. Daniel stepped back, slightly. "Going down?" he asked politely. The woman didn't answer. She stepped into the elevator slowly. Her movements were careful, as if she didn't trust the floor. She stood beside Daniel without pressing any buttons. Daniel glanced at her. "Lobby?" he asked. The woman's lips parted slightly. Her voice came out soft, breathy, like someone speaking through cold air. "I'm already late," she whispered. Daniel's throat tightened. "Late for what?" The woman looked at him then, eyes pale and unfocused. "For checkout," she said. Daniel stared, confused. The elevator doors closed. The elevator began to descend again. At the 10th floor, the lights flickered and the elevator jolted slightly. The woman's head turned toward Daniel, slow and unnatural. "You're not supposed to ride with me," she whispered. Daniel's breath caught. The elevator continued down. In the mirror, Daniel saw something behind the woman's reflection. A faint shadow in the corner of the elevator ceiling, like a stain that moved slightly as the elevator moved. Daniel forced himself to look away. When the elevator reached the lobby, the doors opened. The woman stepped out without looking back, walking toward the building's inner hall, not toward the front doors. Daniel watched her go, heart pounding. He stepped out into the lobby and looked for Pierce. Pierce stood behind the desk, face calm. Daniel whispered, "There was a woman from the 7th," she said. Pierce's eyes flicked up, and Daniel saw warning there. "Don't," Pierce said softly. Daniel swallowed. "She said she was late for checkout." Pierce's face went still. Then Pierce sighed, as if something long avoided had finally been spoken. "I told them to fix the elevator," he murmured. "Years ago." Daniel's throat tightened. "What is checkout?" Pierce looked around the lobby, making sure no residents were close enough to hear. Then he leaned forward slightly. "Your building used to be something else," Pierce whispered. "Before it was apartments?" Daniel frowned. "What?" Pierce's voice was low. "A hospital annex," he said. "Long-term care. People stayed here while their families decided what to do. People waited." Daniel's stomach twisted. Pierce continued, eyes tired. "They had a checkout desk," he said, "in the lobby. People had to be signed out when they left. Bodies had to be logged." Daniel's mouth went dry. "And the 7th floor?" he whispered. Pierce's gaze drifted toward the elevator. "That was the waiting floor," he said softly. "Where they kept them when paperwork didn't match, when families didn't come, when nobody claimed what was left." Daniel felt cold spread through him. Pierce's voice softened. "The building got renovated," he said. "They painted over it. They put in carpet. They called it apartments." He looked at Daniel. "But the elevator remembers," he whispered. "It still stops where it used to stop. It still opens for people who never checked out." Daniel's heart hammered. He wanted to laugh, to call it superstition. But he remembered the woman's damp hair, her heavy coat, her pale eyes. He remembered her whisper, "I'm already late." Daniel went to his apartment that night and tried to ignore the elevator. But routine was a trap. Morning came. Friday, 6:40. Daniel stood in the elevator again because he had work. The elevator doors closed. It descended. It stopped on the 7th. The doors opened. The hallway was darker than before. At the far end, the black wreath hung on the door. And now, on the floor in front of the elevator, there was a clipboard. A real clipboard, wood-backed with a sheet of paper clipped to it. Daniel stared. He didn't step out. The clipboard sat there, patient, like an offering. The elevator's interior light flickered. Daniel felt his stomach twist. He leaned forward and looked closer. The paper on the clipboard was a sign-out sheet. columns. Name, unit, timeout, destination, signature. At the top, in neat handwriting, was a name already filled in. Daniel Mercer, Unit 1206, time 6:40. Destination, blank, signature, blank line waiting. Daniel's breath caught. He stepped back inside the elevator. The doors stayed open. The building waited. Daniel felt his heart pounding against his ribs like it wanted to escape. He whispered, "No." The elevator lights flickered again, and from the hallway a soft whisper drifted toward him. Not one voice, many, layered, patient. "Sign out," they whispered. Daniel's throat tightened. He pressed the lobby button repeatedly. Nothing happened. The elevator did not move. The doors stayed open. The clipboard waited. Daniel realized with sick clarity that the elevator wasn't malfunctioning. It was offering him something, a way to leave, a way to be written into the building's old system, to become a person in its old paperwork. And once you were in the paperwork, you belonged to it. Daniel held his breath. He forced himself to step forward, not out into the hallway, but close enough to reach the clipboard without fully exiting. His fingers trembled. He grabbed the clipboard and pulled it into the elevator. The moment he touched it, the cold smell intensified, like a freezer door opening. The whispering grew louder, excited, eager. Daniel looked at the page. His name looked too neat, too confident. The pen clipped to the clipboard was cold metal. Daniel's hands shook as he picked it up. He didn't want to sign, but he understood the pressure now. The elevator would not move until something was completed. He thought of missing work, of losing his job, of spiraling. He thought of his wife leaving because she said he lived like he was already gone. His throat tightened. He wrote something in the destination line. Work. His handwriting looked shaky. The whispers softened slightly, as if satisfied. Then Daniel's hand moved toward the signature line. He stopped. His breath shook. He dropped the pen. The whispers surged. "Sign out," they hissed, still soft but insistent. Daniel backed away, shaking his head. "No," he whispered. "I'm not leaving." The whispers paused. Then, from the hallway, the woman in the heavy coat appeared again. She stood at the end of the hall, watching. Her voice drifted to him like cold air. "You'll have to eventually," she whispered. "No one stays without signing something." Daniel's throat tightened. "I'm alive," he whispered. The woman smiled faintly. "So was I," she said. Daniel's stomach dropped. The elevator lights went out. For one long second, Daniel stood in darkness holding the clipboard, hearing only his own breathing and the faintest sound of an old building settling. Then the lights came back on, and the elevator was no longer in the building. Daniel saw it immediately in the mirror. The reflection behind him wasn't the beige hallway. It was a different lobby, older, tile floors, a desk with a lamp, a sign on the wall that read checkout, and behind the desk sat a clerk, a man in an old-fashioned uniform, head down, writing steadily. The elevator doors were still open to the 7th floor hallway, but that hallway now looked different too. No carpet, old linoleum, dim lights, doors with numbers painted in black. Daniel's heart hammered. He clutched the clipboard. The clerk behind the checkout desk looked up. His eyes were dull and patient. He smiled slightly. "Name?" the clerk asked, voice calm. Daniel's throat tightened. He looked down at the clipboard. His name was already there. The destination line read, "Work." The signature line waited. Daniel whispered, "This isn't." The clerk's smile widened slightly. "It's time," he said softly. "You've been riding without checking out for years." Daniel's breath caught. He realized then what the building had been doing. Not just stopping on the 7th, not just showing him the clipboard. It had been slowly aligning him with its old rules, its old paperwork, making sure he fit. Because the building didn't care whether you were alive in the way you thought. It cared whether you were present in its system. The whispers from the hallway rose again, softer now, almost comforting. "Sign out," they murmured. "Then you can go." Daniel's hands trembled. He thought of the elevator never moving again, of being stuck between floors, of his life becoming a waiting room. He picked up the pen. He held it over the signature line. His breath shook. Then, in the elevator mirror, he saw his own reflection shift. For a moment, his face looked paler. His eyes looked duller. His shoulders slumped as if weighted, like the woman in the heavy coat, like someone who had been waiting too long. Daniel's chest tightened with sudden rage. He dropped the pen again. "No," he whispered. The clerk's smile faded. The whispers in the hall sharpened. The elevator lights flickered violently. The doors began to close. Daniel lunged forward, shoving his arm into the doorway to stop them. Pain shot through his forearm as the doors pressed. He cried out. The doors reopened slightly. Daniel stumbled backward, breathing hard, clutching his arm. The clerk watched him, expression calm again. "You can refuse," the clerk said softly. "But refusing doesn't make you leave. It only makes you stay longer." Daniel's throat tight. "What happens if I sign?" The clerk's eyes held that patient attention again. "You go where you wrote," he said. Daniel stared at the destination line. Work? Was that a place or a concept? Daniel's mind spun. The elevator shuddered. The whispers softened again, coaxing. "Just sign," they murmured. Daniel's arm throbbed. His breath shook. He picked up the pen again, slower, resigned. He signed his name. The moment the pen left the page, the cold smell vanished. The elevator lights steadied. The mirror reflection returned to the beige apartment lobby. The doors closed. The elevator descended smoothly to the ground floor. When the doors opened, Daniel stepped out into the normal lobby. Pierce was behind the desk, eyes on Daniel, face pale. Daniel clutched the clipboard, shaking. Pierce whispered, "You didn't." Daniel's throat tight. "I had to." Pierce's eyes were wet. "No," he whispered. "You didn't." Daniel looked down at the clipboard. The page was blank now. No name, no ink, no signature, just clean paper. Daniel's breath caught. He looked up at Pierce. Pierce whispered, "Where did you write you were going?" Daniel swallowed. "Work." Pierce's face crumpled slightly. "Oh," Pierce whispered. Daniel's stomach turned. "What?" Pierce shook his head slowly. "You'll see," he said softly. Daniel left the building, heart pounding, and walked to his car. The morning air felt normal. The street looked normal. People walked dogs. Traffic moved. Daniel drove to his office downtown. He parked. He went inside. The building was empty. No receptionist, no co-workers. The lights were on, but dimmer than usual. Daniel walked to his desk. On it was a clipboard, the same clipboard, a sign-out sheet clipped to it. At the top, in neat handwriting, his name was written. Destination, work, signature, already, signed, and beneath it in smaller letters, as if added as an afterthought. Time in, 6:40 a.m. Time out, pending. Daniel's breath caught. Behind him in the quiet office, he heard a soft whisper, layered and patient. "Now you're here," it murmured. Daniel turned. The office hallway behind him stretched longer than it should, dim and tiled like an old hospital corridor. At the far end, a door with a black wreath hung, and somewhere beyond that, a desk lamp glowed. Daniel stood very still, heart pounding, understanding finally what checkout meant. You didn't sign out to leave the building. You signed out to enter the next place that would keep you. And once you started signing, the paperwork never ended. Because some buildings don't let you be absent. They only transfer you. And that brings us to the end of tonight's collection. I hope these stories gave you the right amount of chills to drift off peacefully. The kind that settle in gently while the rain continues its quiet rhythm outside. Remember, every tale you heard tonight is entirely fictional, made for entertainment, and meant to be a soft, unsettling companion as you rest. Thank you for listening and for spending your evening here with Aged Tales. If you're already feeling heavy-eyed, let the darkness stay calm. Let your thoughts slow down, and let sleep come when it's ready. I'll see you in the next volume. Sleep well.